Welcome. How's it going, man?
I am not dead yet.
I'm
Woody Guthrie
surprised.
used to say that, I believe. Yeah, I think it was him. Yeah, I know. Ready to give our two series a quilting point.
Yeah. Actually, so you had to explain this comment in the chat. The person said, "Y'all are." Wait, wait. Where's the one that was on the top? There was a there.
I think it's gone.
It went away for some reason. Oh,
It here I wait.
yeah.
I think
Because
I
I sent it
remember
to
it.
you, right?
Yeah, I think so. Cause yeah, hold on.
Yeah. I think it went like this. The person was. It was.
Yeah, why said this is like at the end of Split when it turns out it's the universe of Unbreakable. So yeah, what we're basically that's a reference to M. Night Shyamalan's movies where there's a crossover event, and so it's like we're gonna cross over our two series, the one on Lacan and the one on Žižek here.
Yeah. I was going over the conversation, the first conversation we had about Lacan back when I lived in Hawaii in 2020. That was April 2020 is when we did the first one of these. I think the Baudrillard's Dream might have been before that, but as far as like the series goes, the series that we're talking about tonight, the Lacan series started.
That was our first one.
Yeah, it started in April, and then we did another one in May, both in 2020. The next one was like, I don't know, a while later, and then we did those three Žižek ones all this year, right? And so basically, these are
Yeah,
like
I think so.
it's basically like two seasons are being wrapped up into a sort of grand finale. This is the one on power and the phallus. And so,
Yes.
what do you kind of have in mind? How is it? How do you see this as the good quilting point to bring these two series together?
Well, because what we're going to do is, I mean, the phallus is Lacan's concept, but towards the end of the discussion, we're going to veer into how the phallus functions in ideology. And I mean, we could say, I mean, this could be a whole series unto itself, right? But we're just going to give a sketch of how the phallus operates in politics and ideology. And so, in doing that, just, I mean, as simple as that is, that's bringing the Lacan series into the Žižek series.
Yeah, and we weren't even sure that we were going to be able to do this. We've been trying to do it now for like 2.5 months. So the person who said about fucking time, yeah, no kidding,
Mm-hmm.
no kidding.
Yeah, life has thrown Dave and I many obstacles in the last couple of months. So you
Yeah,
know, and I don't see it getting better anytime soon. So,
no,
um, but luckily it worked out where we could do this today.
yeah, I have this temporary. Well, I'm in Anne's apartment. She's moving. Well, I've been living here for the last month, so we're moving. We're out of here in 2 days, so the whole place is torn apart, and like everything's in moving boxes. And just for this one event, I had to set up my computer and all the stuff over here where I have it, and so it's just, I mean, it's magical because Mikey never gets Mondays off, and so this was just like it just happened to work out. Luca says, "I've missed y'all so much," and same here.
We're on a roll, and then life.
Every time I'm on a roll, this life thing happens.
So, but hey, at least, and who knows when we're going to be able. Like, trust me, if we both had our time energy, it would be a constant thing. But neither of us do. Both of us are dealing with the fuckery of life, and you know, we're both writing books. We're finishing books, and so yeah, I mean, we can only do what we can do.
Yeah, so let's do a couple quick points of order or business here. I want to, so people in the chat keep bringing something up that I want to touch on. Night of the World said, y'all are next up on Cadell Last's channel, I think. He is looking for young Žižekians. And he said, or they said, he just had a great talk with Telos Bound. Would love for y'all, for Mikey, to talk with him as well. And then somebody else repasted that comment just to make sure that we wouldn't miss it. I just as a sort of etiquette thing, because I know that a lot of the people watching this entertain the idea of doing stuff like what we're doing, someday in the future, once you've gotten to the point where you've got some things to say, or like you've got some time and energy to experiment around and do video or podcast kind of stuff, or maybe you want to start a blog, whatever. But a lot of the people following this channel have ideas like that, and a couple of our regulars, Master Signified Bodies, as well as Nick, who's probably joining us through the Chevoy channel, I'm guessing, because Nick and Andrew started that Chevoy channel, and they've been doing discussions on Lacan. But yeah, anybody who's getting into doing this stuff or thinking about doing this stuff in the future, if you ever want to work with somebody, you should reach out to them directly through like DMs or through an email, and actually introduce yourself and say why you're interested in working together and stuff like that. Because I've worked with a lot of people, and then it's like you do something and then it's like a one-off, and then you never end up talking to them again. And there can be reasons for that, and there can be weird stuff that happens, and it's not always like the best experience. It's better to talk to someone for a while first to get a sense for them before doing collaboration things. And if you're trying to grow your channel really fast, then I guess you just take every opportunity and you go on everybody's channels. But I'm not. And anybody who's trying to form more genuine connections and do a sort of sustained dialogue with the people that they are involved with is going to appreciate the direct method, as opposed to this, I don't know, like being like a messenger. Because okay, so if somebody's inviting us on their channel, they have to do that themselves. You can't come and do it for them. So you give me the impression that this person who I don't know about is like, I want to bring on young Žižekians, just on the channel, just live, just saying stuff like that. And it's like, well, I coined the term and did it kind of tongue-in-cheek, but had an idea of something to do with that term, and I coined it for that video event we did where we brought McGowan on, and then we all
we did it, but you organized it.
Yeah. So I don't know, do you have anything to add to that, Michael?
I just think you're the one who coined the term, you're the one who organized the video. So look, I'm open to the idea of talking about Žižek or whatever, but I think you need to be, if there's going to be interviews, you need to be the one who goes first or next or whatever, because that was your thing. I was just I was part of the discussion, but you're the one who made it happen. And because people don't get the bigger context of it. Like,
they don't.
Just drop that with Chris Catrone, and then in 24 hours you had organized all of us doing it, including Todd McGowan, which that was incredible that you could get Todd to do that quickly. So yeah, that was your project. It was on your channel. You came up with the name Young Žižekians. You were the one who had the conversation with Chris Catrone, which led into the Young Žižekians discussion. So, no, you're up next, not me.
Yeah, so it's just weird to be like, hey, we're interviewing the Young Žižekians, and it's like, who Why didn't you talk? Well, no one talked to me about it, but we have been getting little whispers from different people messaging us. But it's like, yeah, you're messaging us on the part of someone else who just needs to talk to us directly. So, anyway, it's just an etiquette thing, and it's not, obviously in this case. Let's use the example that it is. It's not Cadell Last's fault. I'm guessing. I'm guessing this has. It's just if any of you want me to go or to bring someone else on this channel, you need to talk to that person about reaching out to me, or you know what I mean. Like, don't just be like, oh, Dave wants to have you on, to somebody else. You know, don't go doing that is all. Yeah. And
okay. Go ahead.
We had talked about using the young Žižekian name there as something for doing like a certain kind of conversation, certain kind of event that we would continue doing, and it was supposed to be tongue-in-cheek because of, for anyone who doesn't get the sort of reference here, Marx was one of the young Hegelians, and the difference between the young and old Hegelians in the colloquial sense for those terms was basically like the religious was the old, and like the more atheistic was the young, and the atheistic was the more socialistic as well. And so I think this included people like, gosh, it had Feuerbach, it had Stirner, it had, you know, there's a few others. But anyway, it was supposed to be kind of like a tongue-in-cheek reference to that. And so, anyway, this is sort of referencing something outside of the immediate conversation. So the immediate conversation is dealing with Žižek, is dealing with Lacan. But it is related. We had Todd McGowan on, and we talked about the importance of Lacan and Žižek for the left. Because Catron had basically said that that's a waste of time. And so... well, we were like, well, no, a theory of subjectivity and a theory of ideology, you know, up to, you know, the complexity of, you know, able to deal with the complexity of humans and actually understand the kinds of people, you know, the subjects that you're working with. That's important. And so that's what that conversation was. It was successful. I suspect everybody already knows about it. Anybody listening to this probably already checked it out. But if you hadn't, go ahead and check it out. But this conversation, yeah, we're basically going to be focusing on power in the phallus and ideology. Michael, in preparation for this conversation, reviewed his phallus posts and I'm guessing some other stuff. I spent a lot of time going over some of our earlier conversations, the Lacan and Žižek ones. And I guess the last point of order I want to say about having gone over all of this is that I think look, a lot of people get annoyed by the sound of their own voice. I do as well. And so, but there's nothing that annoys me more than going over those early conversations with Michael where he's saying something, and so I like to interject in conversations if it can kind of like inject some energy into the conversation, and we're able to pick up and whatever. If it's kind of an interruption, it doesn't end up actually derailing that where the point was going. But when I guess where the point's going, or when I take it into some anecdote or joke that's unrelated, and so then Michael has to spend all this time talking about that. I get that people like the meandering nature of these conversations a lot of the time, but personally, I think I did it a bit too much. And
I don't, but whatever.
You don't? Oh, that's nice to hear.
No.
Okay.
I don't like droning on and on. Like, I mean, again, that's why I like why theory so much opposed to some, you know, or Žižek and so on. Like, whether it's one or two or three people talking, yes, obviously you cross a threshold where there's too many people talking and it just becomes a mess. But I like the conversational format more than just a lecture.
Yeah. Well, you're still going to be doing some lectures pretty soon, aren't you?
Well, yeah, we'll see. I mean, again, you know, it's just my main thing is getting the first book done. It is finished. I'm just adding in a little couple extra quotes and stuff like that. And I took a week off to write a little blog post that I'm going to be posting this week sometime. But, I haven't done anything on the blog in a long time, and I hate that. So, but the main thing is to get the first book out, in the next couple months if we can. And then, everything from that point on is just geared on finishing my main book that I've been working on. I really want it done. I have to finish this.
Dude, in that episode 1, the Lacan episode 1, you actually said that you're working on your book. So this is back in 2020, and you're like, yeah, I've been working on my book, hoping to be done in a few months.
Yeah, it's laughable, but I always say that. But no, it has to, at this point, I have the whole book mapped out. I have huge sections of it written. The book that we're going to publish, which we can, my first book's going to be called The Final Commodity. And it turns out that I ended up writing it as a section in my main book, but then it became so long and took on its own book form that, well, fuck it, we'll just make it my first book. So we're going to release that when we can. And but no, I'm to the point, after working on this thing for 4 years, or I don't know, 5 years, something like that, I have got to bring this thing to fruition finally. So.
Yeah. Well, we can get the Final Commodity out. We are going to. It's just, anyway, I'm wearing this Amazon beanie because it's where I've been most of the time when I'm not sleeping. But
we're both working in warehouses. I just get to work in the better one. You work in hell.
I think mine might be better for listening to audiobooks, except that it's against the rules to listen to. It's against the rules to listen to audiobooks, but as long as I'm getting away with it, it's kind of better because I get to just focus on books for 12 hours. You're joking around with the guys, and you kind of run forklifts and things like that. So you have more diverse. You end up running a lot of errands for the capitalist,
and doing deliveries and doing all that kind of stuff, which I like. I like that it's not each day I'm usually doing something else, or it's really varied. So that's good for me, and I get to leave every day at and Andrew works in a military warehouse. Also, just before we get going, yes, Andrew did a shitload of awesome memes for the Young Žižekian video, and he was the meme master there.
That's true.
And so but the best thing is that I get to leave at 3 every day and go work on philosophy for 3 to 4 hours after work. So without that, I would have headed to the bridge a long time ago.
Yeah, the thing about having 3 12-and-a-half-hour shifts back to back on the weekend is you don't have any time really between shifts except to sleep. You pretty much commute and sleep and pack your lunch, and then you're back to work. But once you're done with those hours, you've basically worked a full work week, and now you are off, right? And so it usually takes about 2 days for me to really have any kind of energy that's useful with time that can be put towards anything. But I've been able to fuse together a little relative time energy towards my writing projects up until I guess this last month when I found out I gotta move again. And I think this has been a kind of consistent factor. Every time that I find out I have to move and I have short notice to move, my writing, I'm usually when I find out, I'm in the groove, getting the hang of things, and then all of a sudden I find out, I have to find some place to live, and it's my groove that I'm in, that I was able to start writing again in, that gets completely thrown out of whack. It's like Emperor's New Groove, when he's like, "Gao, you threw off my groove." Yeah. That's how I feel every time every fucking time. And so, just quick little. I mean, anybody who's like just tuning in who didn't hear our update about that, it's no fault of mine really, or not at all, and not of the. It's nothing between me and the homeowners where I was living or anything like that. I think that there's probably been living situations I had that didn't work out where it might have been personal, and then they said, "Oh, it's not you" or whatever. But in this case, there's like a family crisis that they just
unavoidable.
It's unavoidable, and they just need privacy, and all of their plans for the next couple of years have completely been altered, and so yeah, it just didn't make sense for me to be there anymore. Like almost nobody was living there anymore. In fact, when I went to get some of my stuff a couple weeks ago. So anyway, I'm moving. Ann and I are going to be camping for the next month and a half, and then we're going to Europe, and I'm going to have some time to do some writing while I'm there, and then when I get back, we're making plans right now to go somewhere where I'll hopefully be able to get some more writing done, get the next 3 books finished out. And as it says in the introduction to my first book, Waypoint, the point of writing these books right now is to start a dialogue with a few people. And I think that if you're here for this, then you might be one of those people. Michael's definitely one of those people. And to flesh out my thoughts on a bunch of things before I start trying to... I've given myself more time. I don't know. Do you remember that in the book, Michael?
Yeah.
I just got interviewed for One Dime's podcast, One Dime Radio, and he brought up the fact that using words like structural stultification doesn't exactly make Waypoint normie friendly. You know, he was talking about how like the book could have almost had like a pretty wide reach, but you know, it's things like that, and it's like it's true, but also like I need my own concepts and my own system, my own theory before I write books that are going to be simplified. So
right.
You know, I'm giving myself some time to do that, and it's nice. It's nice having. It's like, oh, I can just focus on wage labor, and listen to a lot of the literature review, and do this writing on these little vacations that we're planning. So, anyway, that's the updates. That's what's going on, and that's the sort of facticity of where we're both streaming from. And yeah. That's probably enough preamble. I think we probably...
Ready to go into this?
Yeah, so when you hear the phallus, when anybody hears the phallus, if they know what it means, they probably just think it's a fancy word for a dick.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So before we go, like, and that's I want to start with that clarification, but real quick, like I got to give a shout out. I did at the beginning of my blog post on the phallus. The phallus is such a complex and overdetermined concept in Lacan that for years I had so much trouble understanding what the hell Lacanians were talking about when they used it. And I mean, you can say the same thing for jouissance or objet, but I really like there's always so much more subtlety going on when they use the phallus, and none of them bother to explain it. And so it wasn't really until Todd McGowan did his YouTube video lecture on the phallus that it really all clicked for me. And just the basics that he laid out in that video made so much shit click for me that I was able to write this, detailed blog post on it, which I've told you, it's probably my personal favorite out of my blog posts. So it's just, I want to give a shout out to Todd because it's his video that really unlocked this concept for me. And I also want to just say thanks to Brian Becker, otherwise known on YouTube as Singularity is Sublimity. Brian is doing a ongoing, well, he's got two series going on his channel. One on Heidegger's Being in Time, and the other one is he's going chapter by chapter through all of Lacan's seminars. And what he's like, if Lacan is God, then Brian is doing the Lord's work. uh, so because this, there's not. You think there would be a commentary at this point that would give us like an introductory orientation to the seminar as a whole, like all 27 years or whatever of the seminar. And somebody could say, well, how the hell could you do that? I mean, somebody could take 10 pages and just write a brief description of like the main things in each seminar, just to give a basic cognitive mapping of the seminar. Well, Brian is doing videos like this, and now Andrew and Nick on their channel, they're doing something similar. Which, you know, Brian does these shorter videos, and the difference, like with Andrew and Nick, is that they have this long format where they're able to really reflect on each, you know, each thing in each seminar and discuss it and really flesh it out. So, but I like Brian, you know, like Singularity is Sublimity, actually referenced my blog post on the phallus in his latest video on seminar 4. And so that was like, I'm a huge fan of his, and so that was really cool. And just want to say, hey, thanks to him for, you know, referencing the blog post.
It's nice for people to actually, you know, do it properly and actually, you know,
Yeah,
actually reference you, you know.
it's cool.
Yeah.
So, okay, so let's get into this. So, yes, for starters, the phallus is not the penis. Now, the tricky thing is, can the penis be the phallus in a given situation? Yeah, but we have to understand what the phallus is to understand how the penis can come to be the phallus. But it's much better to just disassociate them for now. And what's important is that by Lacan, so Lacan's going to say the phallus is a signifier, which, yeah, it's a real Lacanian thing. And when you just hear those 5 words, it doesn't seem to mean much. But there's something really profound in it, because by making the phallus a signifier, he's making it an arbitrary and contingent semiotic element, which is to say, it's a way of undermining patriarchal essentialism. The phallus is not an essence that, you know, men have. It's a symbolic, semiotic, cultural, contingent, arbitrary construction, and that's what's so important about understanding that the phallus is a signifier, not an essence, not a substance. But nonetheless, and this is what we'll get to, men have this tendency to treat the phallus as if it was a substance. But that we'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
So, to say the phallus is a signifier, well, then the question is, what is a signifier? Now, you and I have been through this a bunch, but simply put, it, you know, this is coming out of Saussurean linguistics, where Saussure thinks out the concept of the sign. So, for example, the sign is made out of signifier and a signified, which, simply put, you have the word cat, which would be the signifier, CAT, and then you have the concept of cats, right? That's the signified. And so the sign is those two as a unit, right? But Lacan, in doing the work of psychoanalysis, he gives a primacy to the signifier. And the reason is because when it comes to actually dealing with patients in the psychoanalytic setting, you find that you can't just rely on the basic signifieds or concepts that are attached to signifiers that you get in like the dictionary. So the point is, when it comes to the analysans discourse, the speech of the patient, signifiers have a very idiosyncratic web of associations with them. And so these signifiers, you can't just presuppose the general concept is what they indicate. And it's through listening and paying attention to the analysan's discourse, that you can start to, and especially through slips of the tongue, you start to an analyst starts to be able to map out the idiosyncratic associations in the patient's discourse. And so that's why signifiers are primary in psychoanalysis. It's because you can't rely on just, oh, they said tree, and I know what tree is because we all know what tree is. Like, no, tree can mean something radically different in the idiosyncratic context of the patient's speech. And so what you really have to go off of is signifiers and not signs.
Like, you just got to think about the fact that you can have... I don't know if this is like a common experience, but I know that it's common enough that there's probably some people in the chat who can think about like not liking a word, but not having any reason for not liking the word. It's not because of what it actually means, but because it kind of sounds a certain way to you. And so, in linguistics, you've got denotation and connotation. Denotation is what's defined. That's the agreed upon dictionary definition, or definitions, because there can be multiple, obviously, because a lot of words can be contested and they can be used in different ways by different groups. And so when the dictionary people have to figure out, well, what's the real definition for this word, they're going off of how it's been used. And a word can take on a new usage given a new group of people, and it can have a different connotation to a different group of people. So the connotation can actually be the opposite of what's denoted, right? So something can be, I don't know. Let's use socialism as an example because we've used that as a signifier before in the conversation we had with McGowan. But we also talked about it in episode 1 of the Lacan series when we talked about language. But, it's just, it's a word that has a definite meaning, probably, if you're using it. But it also has different connotations to different people. And so any signifier that you use is going to have different connotations. Like, there's people who are just like, I don't like people with the name Mike. I don't like people with the name Olivia. Like what the fuck?
And that has nothing to do with like general language or semiotics. Like, there's something libidinal in that. There's something particular to that person.
Exactly.
And it's through talking it out that you can get at it. You can't go to a dictionary and go, let me look up the meaning of that and get anything.
Exactly.
So, okay. But here's okay. So for Lacan, because he's focused on signifiers primarily, most of the time when he's talking about stuff, he'll refer to them as signifiers. Because for him, once things have a name or a signifier within language, he believes that the word has a profound effect on things. I mean, Lacanians often talk about the word is the murder of the thing, which is something they get from Hegel. But there is a sense in which once something has had a name attached to it, it's very, very hard to even begin to try to disassociate the thing from that signifier and the signifier's relation to other signifiers. And I mean, an easy example is, okay, words are arbitrary. There's no absolute reason we call cats cats, or we call movies movies, or we call trees trees, right? Well, there's no absolute reason Nazis are called Nazis. And because of this contingency, we could go, well, we can just switch what it means because there's no absolute meaning. Yeah, but trying to give Nazis a good, loving connotation, try as you might, it's just not going to work. Like, within the history of our language and signifiers, that signifier carries all sorts of negative connotations, and be it arbitrary as a signifier, it still has almost like a glued array of associations within language, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's part of why, like, you can't, like, yes, signifiers and It's arbitrary and contingent. But once it has taken hold, it's not just as you can't just go, oh well, it's arbitrary and contingent. Let's call cats Zoogiloos and it won't be a problem. Yeah, it'll still be a problem. Like, and so
Zoogiloos. I love
yeah,
Zoogiloos.
and it's a right. It's just
They
it's a
purr.
weird thing that they words and signifiers um, they take on a kind of life of their own within language, right? So
So he focuses on the signifier instead of the signified.
yes, because where a linguist or a semiotician, they would focus on the general usage of the words. We're talking about trees, cats, whatever. Lacan, being a psychoanalyst, he's focused on the radical singularity, particularity, idiosyncratic dimension of the patient's speech. And so, because of that, signifiers have to be primary. You can't rely on the default signifieds. You have to attune yourself to the actual signifiers the patient's using to be able to get anywhere.
Fair enough.
So
the phallus is a signifier.
The phallus is a signifier. It is a semiotic element, but it's for Lacan, it's the main signifier, right? And we'll get to why that is in here in a moment. So Lacan, especially early on throughout the seminar, Lacan starts to rethink the Freudian Oedipus complex.
Mm-hmm.
And he does so in a structureless way. So Freud kind of acts like he gives a certain essentialism to the mother. The mother is a biological woman, the father is a biological man, and blah, blah, blah. Lacan doesn't do that. He thinks that the mother, the father, these are positions, right? They're roles, and they can have all different contents. So two women, a lesbian couple one could be the mother, one could be the father. Because for Lacan, he's as a structuralist, at least in part, he's viewing these in terms of social positions or roles or functionalities. The mother is the primary caregiver, the one who is always taking care of the kid, feeding the kid, changing the kid, like making sure the baby has all its needs satisfied. Right. Now, when viewed that way, well, a man can do that. Man, woman, gay, straight, doesn't matter. The father is the one who steps in and separates the mother from the baby, like comes in and says, this can't last forever. This dynamic has to be broken apart. Okay. But before the father does that, there's an intermediary term, and that is the phallus. So you almost have to kind of try to do a like a baby phenomenology. It sounds funny, but like you try to picture yourself, like imagine you're a baby in a crib and you're crying, you're all fussy because you either want to be changed or you want to eat, and you start to notice like the primary caregiver, i.e. the mother, she starts vanishing more and more, right? The primary caregiver disappears for longer and longer. Well, Lacan claims that like the baby starts to theorize. It's almost like the first forms of thought. Like, okay, well, she's here and then she's gone. She's present, she's absent. Something is drawing her or luring her away from me. Well, I want mom to stay here and to be all mine. Okay, but whatever this other thing is out there, it must have more power to make her happy or draw her attention than I do. Well, I want to be that thing. That is the phallus. Like early on, that's what the phallus is. It's the thing that has the power to make mom happy, give her enjoyment, satisfy her desire. And it's as if it's like an object out there in the world. It's something. Of course, I mean, the mom has to leave the room for a whole number of reasons. If she has There's or the primary caregiver has to leave. There could be other kids that need attention. There's work, right? The mother has a job or whatever it is. There's all kinds of things that can make the mom have to separate from the kid.
Like
So
inevitably, a kid ends up having its primary caregiver have to do things that makes it so that the nipple is not, or the bottle's not on demand, right?
or her loving gaze isn't on demand, or her
Mm-hmm.
the soothing sound of her voice isn't on demand, right? Like the, she vanishes, the kid can't process it, and it comes up with this hypothesis that there's the thing out there that is more special and more and has this power to satisfy her in a way the kid doesn't. And so the kid starts trying to speculate, well, what do I have to do this? What is this thing, right? So eventually the kid starts to go, oh, it's the father who has this thing. The father has the special object, the phallus, and the phallus is what makes him special, and that's why the kid can have a rivalry with the dad. Is because the kid feels jealousy towards the dad because the dad has the thing that the mom desires or whatever. Okay, so at some point the 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 function of the father is to be the agent of socialization and prohibition. The father, the symbolic father, steps in and says, "Look, you cannot cling to your mother forever, and the mother cannot cling to you forever. You two have to separate. You have to become an autonomous subject of your own. You have to live in accordance with social protocols and rules and customs. You cannot just have enjoyment at your mother's body forever." Um, and in a weird sense, on the one hand, this seems somewhat traumatic for the kid. On the other hand, there's a liberation involved too. Like the dad or the father function, the phallic function, is to separate the kid. Like you're not a symbiotic unity forever. You get to be your own autonomous subject, right? This is what Lacan refers to as symbolic castration. It's what we would call socialization, right? But the cost of this, the cost of, in a sense, losing the mother, in a sense, of course, your primary caregiver can still be in your presence all the time, but there is a sense in which you've had to sacrifice the primary caregiver. And in doing so, the kid retroactively believes like they've made some huge sacrifice uh, to appease the father, to appease the law, and that they've given up their enjoyment, jouissance, right? You've heard this story. We've talked about this a bunch, but I'm returning to this just because I don't know how much we emphasized the phallus in this scenario.
In
So,
the Oedipus scenario.
right. So the point is for Lacan, there's the mother-child unity. There's the phallus that comes and it starts to break this unity apart. And then the father is the one who gets identified as the one who has the phallus. So there's four terms, but the phallus is fundamentally comes to be associated with the father, right? And so, but that's the thing, right? Like the phallus, because of this, it has a fundamental link to both the law, which is to say social authority, um, paternal authority, but it also has a fundamental link to jouissance, right? Because the phallus, the one who has the phallus, the special object, because they have it, they're the one who has like a social status above yours. They're the one who gets to rule. They're the one who gets to impose restrictions and prohibitions. And so, and that's why they're able to have the authority to impose symbolic castration, which is to say, you can't go on enjoying the way you enjoy. You have to sacrifice your enjoyment on the altar of the social, right? Of social normality. in order to become accepted into the social order. And again, it's not like the kid really had this mythical enjoyment. Like, it's a retroactive fantasy. It's something you have to give up, something you never really had to begin with in order to become a member of society. And but that's the point, right? The phallus has this fundamental role it plays in law and in jouissance, or the sacrifice of enjoyment.
So, and I just, just to sort of put it in my own words here, I think that the point is that, like, when you're a baby, you've got absolutely nothing. You don't have any legs to stand up on. You can't even look around. You don't have words for anything, but you still know that there is a satisfaction that can be achieved through that primary caregiver. And so when that person's gone, like, that can be pretty terrifying. And if you've ever heard a baby just screaming, like, just absolutely terrified, like, they don't know they don't know anything. But at a pre-linguistic level, which is a lot of the theorists that we're into deal with things that in this pre-scientific, pre-linguistic, pre-meaningful way. Like, what are the background conditions of intelligibility, right? Well, Heidegger in Being and Time does a lot towards understanding the background intelligibility, for most of the things that philosophy tends to deal with. He's getting at the background conditions for those. Well, yeah, but he doesn't deal with development, with childhood development. And there are these formative experiences in childhood development. And we already had the conversation in episode 1, actually, about the is this transhistorical theory of the subject, or is this specifically a capitalist theory of subjectivity? And a lot of what we're talking about, there are universal structures in play. In almost any society, there's still a primary caregiver, right? In almost any society, there's still a primary caregiver. The child still desperately relies on that care, and there are social forces, and also probably natural ones, that make it so that that person becomes off limits from time to time. So that has to be, there has to be a signifier for that. Like, you're not inducted into language yet, but nonetheless, you have a sense that there is something in the way making that lack.
Exactly. I mean, here's the thing. I mean, I think Husserlian phenomenology is helpful here. The point is, the kid, the kid doesn't have language yet or signifiers, but phenomenologically, they have enough intelligence to recognize that the mother's intentionality drifts off of them, that her attention goes somewhere else. And because of just this basic ability to recognize attention, and I'm sorry, animals can do this, right? Like, animals can understand, they process if your gaze is fixed on them or not. Like, there's many animals, you can't stare them in the eyes, they get very aggressive, so animals understand intentionality, or the attention being fixed on them. So human babies have this same ability pre-language to tell, like, oh, whatever's going on, mom's attention is somewhere else, and then she leaves the room. So they have enough ability to go, okay, something's lured her away, captured her attention, desire.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah. So the thing is, when it comes to the phallus, though, like, it's something the paternal figure, the symbolic father, has. So it's almost like a supplement. Now, Žižek has a great quote on this I want to read here. This is from his book Disparities, and the quote is from pages 259 to 260. So Žižek says, symbolic castration is the price to be paid for the exercise of power. How precisely? One should begin by conceiving of phallus as a signifier. which means what? From the traditional rituals of investiture, we know the objects which not only symbolize power, but put the subject who acquires them into the position of effectively exercising power. If a king holds in his hands the scepter and wears the crown, his words will be taken as the words of a king. Such insignia are external, not part of my nature. I don them, I wear them in order to exert power. As such, they castrate me. They introduce a gap between what I immediately am and the function that I exercise, i.e., I am never fully at the level of my function. This is what the infamous symbolic castration means. Not castration as symbolic, as just symbolically enacted, in the sense in which we say that when I am deprived of something, I am symbolically castrated. But castration, which occurs by the very fact of me being caught in the symbolic order, assuming a symbolic mandate. Castration is the very gap between what I immediately am and the symbolic mandate which confers on me this authority. In this precise sense, far from being the opposite of power, it is synonymous with power. It is that which confers power on me. And one has to think of the phallus not as the organ which immediately expresses the vital force of my being, my virility, and so on, but precisely as such an insignia, as a mask which I put on in the same way a king or a judge puts on his insignia. Phallus is an organ without a body, which I put on, which gets attached to my body, without ever becoming its organic part, namely, forever sticking out as its incoherent, excessive supplement. I don't think he ever has said it better than in that paragraph.
I would, well, I mean, okay, I you got to unpack it then, because it's not it. You got to make that talk. I know it's very clear for you, but for me,
Here,
it's
I'll give you the easiest example. A cop, it's the difference between a cop walking around in street clothes and a cop having his uniform and badge.
oh, right.
Like, there is a fundamental phenomenological difference. At one moment, he's just a person. At the next moment, he is the embodiment of the social law itself. And there's this distinction between this social function, this social position as cop, and the person in their, like, imaginary dimension. And when I say imaginary, I mean their ego, their sense of, like, their who they are as a person, right? Like, the position of the cop is a symbolic position, right? It's one of social authority, etc. Whereas the cop who loves AC/DC and loves to go bowling, well, those are like the personal things that make his ego what it is, the things he identifies with, right? Which make him what we would say the person he is. And so that's the point about the phallus, is that the phallus is some, and you can see the badge is the symbolic phallus. The uniform is the symbolic phallus. The king's crown is the symbolic phallus. And the point is, they themselves don't have this authority in them. It's only because we see in them, oh, they possess the phallus. They possess the signifier that indicates that they have the authority. That they have the authority. It's the signifier that gives them the power. Not, it's not, and this is the thing, right? Like, the masculine, like, the mistaken reasoning that we could say is masculine is, I have this signifier because I have, like, the special power or special status. No, you only have the special status or power because you have the signifier. Like, there's nothing in and of a king that makes them a king, right? Like, this is the bullshit about essentialism. Like, oh, kings are essentially born to rule. No, they're fucking not. What makes them kings is the robes and the the position that their bloodline has in society. All of these things are signifiers that bestow on them this extraordinary authority. It's not their essence. It's not them in their immediate being, right?
Right.
And so that's what Žižek's getting at there, and that's why he says the phallus is an organ without a body. I mean, he loves to do this reversal of Deleuze and Guattari's body without organs. He wants to talk about organs without bodies, and a lot of the times that refers to our drives. But in this case, the phallus itself is, even though it's not a drive object, it's a partial object. It's a scepter, a badge that takes on a life of its own. Like, it has its own power in society, and it's not just another object among objects. It's a privileged object, and so that's what he's saying is, like, it's an organ without a body insofar as it's some contingent arbitrary signifier that comes to give the person who possesses it a unique social power or authority.
So, like, the uniform is a good example, as well as, like, obviously the king has his regalia.
The judge has, I mean, especially the traditional judge, like black robe, the white wig, the gavel, right, that they bang. There's these things that signify their position as authority figures.
So these are institutions that have a function and a role with various signifiers that bestow that or grant that recognition or are to help people recognize that you're the person who's fulfilling that role or who holds that function. And so what would be like an example of this outside of an institutionalized
Well, I mean, the greatest
setting?
example of it, which is, well, unless you want to call the nuclear family an institution, which obviously gets called that, but
Right.
I mean, that's what the symbolic father does. Like, the symbolic father in a child's life lays the foundation for cops to be cops, for teachers to be teachers, for judges to be judges, and you could even say for God to be God, at least in how God operates in this person's life. Because what the symbolic father does in breaking apart the mother-child unity is it institutes the no. Like, this is why Lacan loves playing with the homophony in French. So there's two terms, non du père and non du père. So in the first one, it's N-O-M, nom du père. In the second one, it's N-O-N, non du père. And that simple switch in French, you go from the name of the father, when it's nom with an M, to the no of the father, when it's nom with an N. So that's what...
Hey, whatever you just did made it so you got louder again, which is good. So you're a little muffled there for a second, whatever you were doing.
Okay, I'm
but
not sure what...
We all heard you just fine, so it's okay.
Okay. So the point is, what the symbolic father does, and so in a sense, the name of the father, right? You have, we take our father's last name, right? In a sense, like, we get branded with the father's name, which this meant a lot more in more traditional societies.
Right.
But even more so than the name of the father it's the introduction of prohibition. And fathers, in one way or another, would indicate, hey, if you don't accept this no, there will be consequences. I have the power to fuck you up. And if you don't take that threat seriously, right? Like, for Lacan, if you don't accept prohibition into, like, prohibition is what is the gateway to the symbolic order proper for you to become a social subject. if you reject the name of the Father, for Lacan, you end up a psychotic. Like, the way to become a neurotic, which is to say an obsessional or a
Not that any of this is a choice, by the way. No one gets to. For anyone listening, this wasn't up to you. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you're so young. Well, it's weird. I mean, look, the clinical structures are a kind of choice, but they're a choice a kid makes unbeknownst to themselves. Like, so much of this is going on at the unconscious level. Like, okay, it's a choice, but it's an unconscious choice. You don't sit there and think it out, right? And so, anyway, yeah, the Father is the one who institutes prohibition, social authority, and law. He, just like the cop, right? The cop embodies the law of society, but every father, every symbolic father does that first, and that is how Lacan conceives of the Oedipus complex, is through basically the retroactive. Like, okay, you do, the kid has to sacrifice enjoyment, but it's retroactive. I know we harp on that as Lacanians because, like, we want to emphasize, like, there was no pure sublime free linguistic enjoyment. The trick of jouissance is that it's actually the product of prohibition. Like, you can only have excessive enjoyment if a limit or a line has been drawn in the sand. Like, this is the limit, right? Like, excess presupposes a line of transgression. And so that's what's important about that. But, okay, so the symbolic father, he gets to impose the prohibition. He gets to impose rules and regulations because he has the phallus. Now, again, a kid, if you ask the kid this stuff, like, they don't explicitly know all this. The point is, this is all like the unconscious logic that's going on in the process of symbolic castration,
right?
Or what we call socialization.
So as a theory, what we're trying to do is to give some words that are already used somewhat in the tradition of psychoanalysis to better flesh out a definite situation that most kids go through, if not all. I don't know. That's going to be, but yeah, everybody goes through an experience, and it's an experience that we understand at this implicit level, at a pre-theoretical level that we don't have words for, and so it's kind of unfortunate that we end up using some of the words that we end up using for these things in the jargon of psychoanalysis, but at the same time, it's like there aren't words for this, so. You know,
like, my favorite example of this.
It's more of like a functional analogy. The word phallus.
Yeah, I mean, I look, I get it why he used this term. So, and a lot of Lacanians think it would be better to not use this term and come up with something else. But the point is, it's like, okay, this is the example I like to use. You know how many parts there are in an engine? Like, those parts need names to be able to keep it straight, right? Like, to be able to master the ability to work on an engine, to take it apart, fix it, put it back together. You need all of these various parts to have names. And that's what Lacan is doing with our libidinal economies. And so he chose to give this specific, I mean, and that's the thing, right? The phallus is a non-object. It's like objet. Now, they're not the same, and we can talk about that later. But
oh God,
these Lacanian objects, das Ding, phallus, objet, they're negative objects. They're not real. But the weird thing is, like, they're the most pressing, the most important load-bearing objects for us. They're the objects that make particular objects matter to us, even though they, like, you can't weigh them on a scale. They don't have physical properties. They're negative, virtual, hypothetical objects, but for us, they're the most real objects there are.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and here's the thing: when I first got into this, I kind of thought phallus was a bad name for it. Now I kind of think it is like, because it is about paternal authority. It's just, you know, it
Well,
I don't know.
in the original the primordial scene, the cave people, there's an
The
actual,
primal father, which we're going to talk about.
yeah, the primal father's got an actual phallus. It actually gets in the way of you being able to, it gets in the way of your primary caregiver, because this authoritarian figure, the basic,
And the point is, it's a myth. Like for Freud, it's a myth, and whether or not, people can argue, well, did he take it as anthropology or is it just a myth? For Lacan, though, it straight up is a myth, or a fantasy. But it's a myth or a fantasy that primarily structures masculine subjectivity or identity, so to speak.
right, which is part of the reason why this post is such a big deal, I think. So
Yeah.
we'll get more into that, but I mean, for me, it's been I've returned to this post multiple times, and I said it's my favorite of your posts.
I thought you said that, yeah.
If I did, I wouldn't be surprised I said that, because it definitely is one of my favorites, if it's not the favorite. And anybody who hasn't read it, I still think that this conversation should only be like a primer for the actual blog post that you wrote on the phallus. If people are like your friend Christian and they prefer they won't read a blog because they got to have it in their hands, it'll come eventually, when Michael writes that book eventually. But for now, gender is a complicated thing, and we live in complicated times when it comes to gender. And a lot of people want to oversimplify by either saying, oh, it's just the same thing as sex, or, oh, it's whatever you make it. And this is a theory that has to be taken seriously if you actually want to do gender theory. Butler obviously deals with Lacan's theory of the phallus, but we would say does so inadequately in Gender Trouble, because she doesn't get into its more symbolic and real aspects. She pretty much stays in the imaginary, I think, is what we've said about this so far.
So if you ask Žižek or Alenka Zupancic, and I believe Dwayne Roussel would say the same thing, you ask them, like, what goes wrong with Judith Butler's theory of gender, they would say, like, it's that she makes it all imaginary and symbolic. She doesn't understand the role of the real in sexual difference. And so Lacan, when it comes to Seminar 20, what he's doing in working out the two sexuated positions, you can say they're symbolic in a sense, because they're not clinical structures, they're the structures of sexual difference, right? But they're real in the sense of, they're not, they're almost like unconscious structures, and so they're not natural. They're not purely reducible to just signifiers in the symbolic order, and they're not reducible to biological essentialism. There's and which is always, that's the big thing, with when people in the culture war talk about gender. Conservatives want to make it into some sort of biological essentialism. Liberal leftists want to make it into a social construction, right? Mm-hmm. Lacan has a third option, and that's what makes him important in this discussion, is that he doesn't do biological essentialism. He doesn't do social constructivism or performativity. The two sexuated positions for him, the masculine position, the feminine position, are not reducible to either. They're something else. And so that in and of itself is a major contribution to gender theory.
Mm-hmm.
So, but okay, when it comes to the symbolic father as phallus bearer, right, it's important for us to get, for Freud and especially for Lacan, right, the very position of masculinity, to be a masculine subject, rests on this fantasy of the primal father, Now, Freud came up with this in his book Totem and Taboo, but the myth or the fantasy goes something like this. Imagine a quote primitive horde, and there's an alpha male type, right? And this guy, he is the one, he has all the power, he gets to monopolize all the women, he has all of his sons, and all of them are threatened by him. He doesn't have to follow the incest taboo. He can sleep with his mother, his sisters, he can sleep with his sons' wives, he can do anything he wants, right? Because he's the exceptional one, right? And he gets to do whatever he wants. He gets to lay down the law, and everybody has to follow what he says. So you can imagine his sons don't like this arrangement. While at the same time, while they don't like him, and they have all types of anger and resentment towards him, they also envy him in a sense.
Right, they want to be him.
And, yes, exactly. So they all band together, and they're like, well, okay, he might be more powerful than us, stronger than us, but if we all unite, we can kill this fucker. So they do. And they kill him, and they eat him. And Freud's point, and this is what Lacan sees in it too, is that once you kill the actual father, he haunts you as the dead father. So the point is like, okay, we killed this guy who monopolized the law, monopolized enjoyment. But now that he's gone, okay, that was like the law as a particular idiosyncratic individual. Now we have to have a virtual framework that we all agree upon. Like, we all have to sacrifice some of our enjoyment to have social cohesion, but that involves sacrificing our enjoyment and agreeing to live in accordance with certain rules. We don't take each other's property, we don't take each other's women, we don't blah, 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 right? And so, but the point is, it is the virtual law is really like the ghost of the symbolic father, the symbolic or the primal father. It's the virtualization of the primal father. And so the law as such, as we think of the law, emerges out of this tyrannical, incestuous, exceptional figure, right? And so it's funny, like this fantasy of I'm like, it's like his sons were men, but he was the man in the way that we talk about the man. Like that's the whole thing. Okay, men are men, but what men really want to be is the man. And when we say like I want to be the man or you're the man, we know what we're saying at some implicit level. We're saying like we recognize like you have a superior status. You have a stronger embodiment of masculine energy or masculine capability than the rest of us, right? And that constitutive exception, like we all know who we are as men because we all want to be the man. We have a masculine ideal, and it's weird. Of course, it can vary, like from culture to culture in some ways, but there's usually there's a strong universality to the features of the man, whether it's special physical strength, cunning, sexual prowess, wealth, right? Like all of these things throughout various cultures indicate the man.
Yeah.
Now, there's other features that make it particular in other cultures, but we all have a pretty shared idea of what it means to be the man.
Right. So like, and I think different big others, or your different sense for the big other might give you a different sense for what it is to be the man, to the point where being the man might be being a femboy. Being the man might, back in the MySpace days, it was what did people call it? Metro, right? you know, it's there were people who, oh, we're losing our sense of masculinity. Where's all the Arnold Schwarzeneggers and Chuck Norris's? Now it's all these skinny little boys like Neo and Harry Potter, and it was like, well, there's different conceptions of what that is, right? But generally speaking, that person is courageous and smart and conflicted and whatever. So but they end up having some kind of ability to make,
I don't know if conflicted, like they're
an impact.
They're very sure of themselves.
So yeah, confidence is feigning phallic power to some degree, or at least there's a masculine way of doing it, you're saying.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, look, like in the 80s, for example, some of the most iconic images of masculinity are those 80s metal bands where all the guys would wear women clothing or have the huge hair and wear glam makeup,
right,
and all of that. And it was precisely, hey, we can take these feminine attributes, make them our own. That's proof of our masculinity. That's proof of our phallic status. Another example, like you could say a masculine icon is Prince, and Prince was like, what, 5'4", and wore pink, ruffled clothing and all of this, and yet he exuded masculine phallic energy in a way that most like pro wrestlers can't, right? Like, so that's the point, right? Is the phallus, it is contingent, and in different societies it can take on different associations or embodiments, yet there endures a kind of universal meaning to it, right? And so, but here's the thing, right? It's important that we make another distinction. So we talk about the difference between the phallus and the penis. Now, Lacan will also refer to the penis as the real phallus. So there's, just like his, imaginary, symbolic, real, his three registers.
Oh,
he thinks there's three phalluses.
Okay.
And so here's the thing. Now, the imaginary phallus is what we're talking about when the kid is like, it's the object of the mother's attention or intentionality or desire, right? It's the object out there in the world. Well, okay, so that's it's imaginary in the sense that in this case, yeah, it is imaginary. It's made up. It doesn't exist. But nonetheless, the kid has the hypothesis that this object is out there. Then there's the symbolic phallus,
which is just to say the kid has like this fantasy. There's a way I could be to where when I feel alone or like when I want my desire satisfied, there's a way I could be that would make it so that I could have that.
Right? All the time.
Yeah, all the time. Okay.
Yeah, but I can always keep mom here, and she won't get distracted or leave me. And that would be possessing this imaginary phallus, which is the object of power, the power over the mother's attention, desire, etc. Now, the symbolic phallus, as a signifier, it is the signifier that indicates that one has the imaginary phallus. So, okay, if we take the imaginary, like, and I say this later on in the notes, but here I think it makes more sense to put it like this, right? Okay, the imaginary phallus is not a real substance. It's not a real thing, but it's taken to be like the essential masculine substance, the masculine power, virility, etc. The symbolic phallus is the signifier that indicates that one has that power. Okay, so it's just as smoke indicates fire, the symbolic phallus indicates the imaginary phallus. Are you with me?
Yeah.
Okay. Point is, of course, there is no imaginary phallus. The symbolic phallus is what we, if we speak in Peircean terms or semiotic terms, it's an empty indexical. Fire indicates or points to, or smoke indicates or points to fire, right? It gestures towards fire. Where there's smoke, there's fire. Well, in the case of the phallus, what we have is a smoke machine. There's smoke, but smoke machines they don't produce smoke through fire. It's a whole, like a chemical process that, fog machines or smoke machines have, but there's no actual fire in smoke machines. And so the phallus, in a sense, is always a simulation. It's always simulating that something is there that actually isn't there.
Which is also to say that it's performative.
You see, I mean, well, here's the problem, right? The problem with saying it's performative, yes and no, because the key, and this is one of the big takeaways, if you try to prove that you have this masculine substance that all other men lack, trying to prove you have it is the surest way to disprove that you have it.
Right.
So in a way, to perform having the phallus, you have to perform not worrying about having the phallus, and not like, if you're worried that you have to prove that you have it, that indicates you don't have it. And so, right, this is the whole thing with bullies. This is why bullies are comedic figures, because they think by picking on somebody weaker or going around beating people up, that's going to prove that they have the phallus. But all that does to everybody else is show how insecure they are,
right,
and how much they lack the phallus. And so that's the irony of being a bully. Like, the very thing you're trying to accomplish, you undermine in the precise way you try to accomplish it.
Right. And so almost any case of a person who seems like overbearingly or comically phallic, where it's like you can see through the ruse. It's like it's I think this is part of the reason why, like, if anybody thinks of like a phallic person, they probably think of like when it's obviously a ruse, right? They're thinking of they're not thinking of Winston Churchill, walking into a room and then people lower their voices and then pay attention. Like that. There's a phallic situation occurring when someone like, Stalin or Churchill walks into the room, as opposed to, like the guy who like is like, you have to listen to me. You have to respect me. I have a big dick. My truck is huge.
I'll fuck you up, pussy.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? But the point is, like, the ones who don't have to try to prove, the way to prove it is to not try to prove it.
Working on it. I'm working on it hard right now. No, I'm just kidding.
So, okay, this is one paragraph I want to read from the blog post, because I think it, like, I don't think I can say it better than I said it here. So, the phallus is 1, the masculine signifier, mark, emblem, indicator, index, and 2, the masculine substance, signified, referent, indicated, pointed to. However, the substantial phallus should not be confused with the real phallus, the penis. What we have in mind here is, with the substantial phallus, is the mythical and exceptional substance inside of a man that gives him extraordinary power. The substantial phallus is what makes a man into the man, what guarantees his exceptional identity and status. The substantial phallus is in scare quotes, I write it substantial in scare quotes, for one significant reason. There is no such thing as the substantial phallus. There is no superpower inside of a man that ontologically separates him from women and from all other men. But this superpower is what the symbolic phallus, the phallic signifier, indicates or refers to. This substantial phallus, the substance, can also be thought of as a supreme masculine virility, potency, fullness, vitality, endowment, plenitude, strength, protuberance, etc. Lacan said, the phallus will become the signifier of power, the scepter, and also owing to which virility can be assumed. That's from Seminar 5. page 258. Lacan then goes on to say that the phallic signifier represents the rise of vital power. That's again from Seminar 5, page 440. The substantial phallus is masculine power. This is why I kept on putting blah, 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 blah. That's not relevant. The symbolic phallus is an empty index. It indicates something that is not actually there. Just like, okay, we could say that smoke indicating fire, the smoke that indicates fire is a full index. Now, index is Peirce's term for that signs or representations that signify through gesturing towards. When it's like when you point your finger at something, it's that kind of meaning, right? Peirce was all about differentiating between different types of meaning, and indexical meaning is one of the three main types for him. And it's just like, oh, I want to remember to do the laundry, and so you put your pair of shoes out in the middle of the room, and that indicates to you, oh yeah, like I need, okay, that indicates do the laundry. Smoke indicates fire, but again, like to use that example I like, the symbolic phallus is a smoke machine. It indicates a fire, but it's not, or a phallus that isn't actually there.
And so a lot of capitalism relies on giving people things that have the connotation of that. So, like, you know, like to a large degree, consumerism is powered by that desire for this smoke machine.
That's why I'm connecting it to Baudrillard, right? Like, I'm using the term simulation here because for Baudrillard, a third order simulation it's a sign that conceals the absence of a profound reality. That's the way he defines it in Simulacra and Simulation. Well, this phallic signifier is, quote, a sign. I'm not using Lacan's distinction here. I'm just sticking with the Baudrillardian term. The symbolic phallus is a sign that conceals the absence of a profound reality. The absence of the profound reality in this case is the substantial phallus, the actual, like, ontologically differentiating power that makes a man the man. That does not exist. That's a profound reality that is absent. Okay, so let's see here. We talked a little bit about how to prove you have the phallus is to disprove it, right? The comedic irony of the bully.
Well, technically, I do have the power in this situation. Yeah.
Right. Hit him across the face with a large piece of concrete and ask him about his power.
Well, think about, like, is it Nicholas II, the last Tsar of Russia, as an example. There's a good example of a person who had the signifiers, had the function and role, but people just kind of, it wasn't believable anymore. He wasn't up to the task of statesmanship, and everybody could see that.
Say a little bit more about that.
What's that?
Say a little bit more about that.
Say more about that? Well, he's the one that, the Bolshevik Revolution ended. As the reign of the Tsars was ended by the October Revolution. Well, actually, not by the October Revolution. There was a earlier revolution that year, but basically the revolutions of that year, of 1917, really resulted in. I think it's the Tsar Nicholas II. I hope I'm getting this right. I'm not a history buff, but anyway, the dude was laughable. If anybody's like followed the stories of like the cartoon Anastasia, and there's the who's the classic villain character in that story. He's got bats and stuff like that. You can't help me out on this? You don't know this dude's name?
I'm drawing a blank.
For fuck's sakes. All right, chat. Anybody in the chat? Whatever. It doesn't matter. Everyone knows who I'm talking about. I'm coming up with all the wrong names right now. But anyway, the point of this villain character, whatever, he's like into the occult, he's into mysticism, he's playing the role of like a prophet, he's hanging out and writing letters to, and like has like this huge relationship, I don't know if it's romantic, with the Tsar's wife, the queen, and everybody is constantly doing things with the king's power or the Tsar's power around him and behind his back, or trying to manipulate him. But the point is that he's not the real power broker. He's kind of, and he's just not really up to the task. Like I think he was like in his own private journals, like fantasizing with ideas of like stepping down or whatever. Yeah, it's Rasputin. Thank you, Chivoy.
Right there, thank you, God.
Thank you, Nick. Yeah, it's Rasputin. Anyway, the point was, it's the little king who stands up and says, "Listen to me." Actually, perfect example is Joffrey in Game of Thrones.
I have another one, yes, but Joffrey, yeah, all of that, the butchery and savagery, is to compensate for his lack, to prove that he actually is worthy of being king.
Right, and the harder you're trying to prove it, the more people start to see through it. Because you're anxious. Suddenly, the confidence bluff is out the window, because you're showing that you're desperate to hold on to power. So you're using these huge acts of force and violence to make a point. But people are like, "Oh, is that all you got?" And oh wow, so this little thing upset you that much, and oh, now you're throwing a temper tantrum.
Your lack is showing.
Your lack is showing, which is something that you say to one of your manager. You give your manager shit all the time. Oh, your lack is showing.
Oh yeah, because he wants to be the phallic authority figure, and so there's like the warehouse manager who is obsessed with having everyone recognize him as the phallic authority, and then there's my best friend who's like the real boss there, the real overarching manager, and he is complete opposite. And yet all you do to the guy who demands the recognition is to fuck with him, and the one who never demands it, you give respect to.
Right.
And so so the way I put this in the blog post, I said, masculinity is always a game of simulation. Some men are simply better at playing the game than others are. The way to have the phallus is never to attempt to prove that one has it. The king's crown only works when it's withdrawn. Imagine a king getting all mad, waving his crown around and shouting, "I'm king, goddammit! Do you see this fucking crown? It means that I'm the fucking king! Treat me like the man, you fucking peasants! I have this crown! This crown means I'm the fucking man!" This image is totally laughable. All the king accomplishes with this outburst is to prove that he's not the true king. Lord Farquaad in Shrek serves as a great example of this.
Farquaad. Yeah, he's another good example.
Right. So, yeah, so that's part of it. And so the way let's see, Žižek talks about the this whole thing, right? So Žižek says, this is from Plague of Fantasies, pages 193 to 194. He says, the supreme example of symbolic virtuality, of course, is that of the psychoanalytic notion of castration. The feature which distinguishes symbolic castration from the real kind is precisely its virtual character. That is to say, Freud's notion of castration anxiety has any meaning at all only if we suppose that the threat of castration, the prospect of castration, the virtual castration, already produces real castrating effects. This actuality of the virtual, which defines symbolic castration as opposed to the real kind, has to be connected to the basic paradox of power, which is that symbolic power is by definition virtual, power in reserve, the threat of its full use which never actually occurs. When a father loses his temper and explodes, this is by definition a sign of his impotence, painful as it may be. The consequence of this conflation of actual with virtual is a kind of transubstantiation. Every actual activity appears as a form of appearance of another invisible power whose status is purely virtual. The real penis turns into the form of appearance of the virtual phallus, and so on. That is the paradox of castration. Whatever I do in reality with my real penis is just redoubling, following as a shadow another virtual penis whose existence is purely symbolic. That is, phallus as a signifier. Let us recall the example of a judge who, in real life, is a weak and corrupt person, but the moment he puts on the insignia of his symbolic mandate, it is the big other of the symbolic institution which is speaking through him. Without the prosthesis of his symbolic title, his real power would instantly disintegrate. And Lacan's point, apropos of the phallus as signifier, is that the same institutional logic is at work already in the most intimate domain of male sexuality. Just as a judge needs his symbolic crutches, his insignia, in order to exert his authority, a man needs a reference to the absent virtual phallus if his penis is to exert its potency. And so, again, I mean, he said a lot right there, but his point is that for us to have any actual masculine or phallic effects in the world, we must maintain this difference. Like, the thing that gives us this power is in reserve. It's withdrawn. I can't brandish it. I can't bring it out. Like, it always has to remain indirect. But I also have to have a reference to it to have what actual power I have in the world. But the moment I try to just say, nope, I'm going to prove that I have this special privileged virtual power, I can't do it because it doesn't exist.
Yeah, so it's one of the little point I want to make about why I find this also so interesting. There's something going on with every social scene that you could possibly walk into, whether it's a workplace, a classroom, a political event, a party, whatever it is, any social situation you walk into, there are going to be people who hold official roles. You know, maybe it's the person whose house it is. It's their house. They're the homeowner. Or it's this is the dean of the university or the professor of the classroom or whatever. In every social situation, there are people who hold official roles. These are formal roles. And then there are also people who hold a sort of symbolic status, and it's hard, it's invisible. You don't just see it. It's not something that can just be shown. People can try to simulate it, but for the most part, it's not something that you see so much as like you'll see who do people defer to, who do people kind of gravitate around and orbit, who are the people who know the people, and who's the person who's got the it factor. This is all kind of stuff that gets lost on a lot of people who don't have I guess spidey senses for social situations, which is a lot of people on the internet, but also, people who gravitate towards the internet a lot of the time might find actual social situations really off-putting. And especially if you are autistic, if you're on the spectrum, then that's going to be a big factor. Lionel Bailey, in his introduction to Lacanian psychoanalysis, talks a lot about how autism in relation to all of this. I don't think he gets too much into the phallic stuff, but in that book. But this is a sort of language for and way of thinking about the social stuff that's happening in these situations, where somebody comes in and wants to call the shots, or give off the sense that, oh yeah, he fucks a lot, oh yeah, this guy, he's got all the things, he's the man, or or you've got
Yeah.
and people see it for what it is, but and a lot of times people will see that for what it is and kind of just assume, well, that's just masculinity. Well, there's if we're going to work with masculinity and femininity, and we are in this case, then there's a more subtle kind of masculine power at work in a lot of these dynamics. And an essay I've talked about before, The Tyranny of Structurelessness, is written by a feminist from the 1960s who's talking about the way that those that an organization or a movement without a structure and without formal structures and roles, responsibilities, accountability processes, whatever, without those formal structures, what you have are these organic structures that revolve around those people who have the it factor, which tend to be male, and what tends to accumulate around them is some gang of dudes. It's usually almost all dudes, and so.
You mean a horde?
Yeah, some fucking horde of guys who got your back. You know, it's like every rap video, you know. It's not just one person. There's always a bunch of backup guys, right? So it's like the person with the it factor attracts these other people who've got his back, basically.
The primal father attracts the primal horde?
Yeah, like just like that. So, I don't know, I just wanted to kind of bring it up as a sort of we hadn't talked about how this isn't just like, a way of understanding masculinity, the ins and outs of masculinity. It's also a way of understanding certain social dynamics, especially certain social dynamics that might be very frustrating for people. And so it's like, what's going on there, you know? Yeah.
Exactly. So I just as a point of clarification, of terminological clarification. So early on, in the seminar, Lacan will talk about the phallic signifier, which primarily gets associated with the name of the father or the know of the father. Like the name / know of the father is the phallic signifier par excellence, right? Like it's the main one. Later on, he's going to also refer to the phallic signifier as the master signifier. And so it just helps to know when you're reading Lacan that phallic signifier, name of the father, master signifier, those are all locked in to really close relations to one another.
But they're
now. Okay, I don't want to say they're all identical, but they're very, very close. And the reason I some of this stuff is, you know, I'm still trying to figure out how I would like exactly and precisely talk about the differences between them or which ones are identical. I'm still working through it, and it's because, look, Lacan was a very creative thinker, but he wasn't the most systematic thinker either. And so, you know, the stuff where he's talking about the phallus in seminars 4, 5, 6, it's not like he's going to revisit all of that before he starts talking about the phallus in seminar 20 or the phallic function. Or when he starts talking about the master signifier in seminar 17.
Well, this is kind of like the problem of like fleshing out the difference between Objet and Das Ding.
Right.
It is. I'm still confused about that, so yeah.
In my main book, I really am going to try to give an example that shows the difference between them. Like I want to figure out. Like I think I have. I think I've figured out an example that really will go. Once you hear this example, which I haven't even shared it with you yet. When you hear it, you'll go, okay, well, if that's it, that makes sense to me.
But like with most of your book, you're keeping it under wraps for now.
Yeah.
Well, by the way, I wanted to say thank you to Salomon da Costa. I know it's midnight where you're joining from in Katowice, Poland. And so,
hello, Salomon.
Yeah, thanks for popping in. Hi, Tony Stark. It looks like Nick and Andrew are still with us. We had some comments from All right. Now at this point, it could, whenever it starts, which there, I think we're going. Yeah, there we go. We're back.
You guys hear us?
Yeah, check. All right. Yay, we're back. I'm back. Just me, though. Nobody else. What's up, everybody? Welcome. We're getting things figured out here. Yay, we're back. I'm waiting for Michael to call me here. Let's see. How do I answer this? Here we go. All right.
Are we back?
Yeah, I think so. All right, but we can wait for chat to confirm that we're back. You know, it just never ceases to amaze me that people can stream at all without having issues, because everywhere I try to do it from, it ends up having issues. And you know, people say, "Oh, check your bit rate." You know, I use the configure wizard to make it so that OBS is set up to use the appropriate stuff, but it's just the internet service is shit.
Mm-hmm.
You know? All right, well,
Here's.
Nick says that he hears us loud and clear. All right, good. And it looks like we have a bunch of people jumped back into the chat, so that's good to see. Everybody, you didn't miss anything. The people watching this in the future, there's going to be two kinds of people watching this in the future. One is the people watching the video that's up on the YouTube channel in its unedited form, and you won't even have really noticed anything. Time won't really have passed. And really where it interrupted me was I was just acknowledging the people in the chat. I was saying Nick and Andrew are still here. Tony Stark had joined the chat. Night of the World's here. Salamun Dakosa is joining from Katowice. It's like after midnight where he's joining from. And so I was saying, you know, it's great to see you. He was saying that this is a fantastic conversation. He's very interested in Lacan and media studies because he's doing some Marxist social science. And anyway, so, but we're back, and that's all I've been trying to talk about when the internet dropped me, and so I had to reset the router, but it looks like things are working now.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
I kind of wanted to do a thing, you know. You've got a lot of really great examples. I hope we can get into some of your examples. You know, your pop culture examples with the phallus, but also I wanted to get into a little bit of, well, and I'm sure you have a sort of master plan for this, but basically I'm thinking, you know, we got to kind of run over what have we talked about at this point in basically seasons 1 and 2, the Lacan series and the Žižek ideology series. And how does the phallus as a quilting point tie together all of this stuff for you?
Right. So, well, so the idea here, the reason I'm viewing it as a quilting point is because the phallus. So in our Lacan discussions, we were primarily focused on some of Lacan's most important concepts. And the phallus is certainly one of those. But the phallus also has a unique relationship to ideology. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of the way we're approaching. So throughout this lecture so far, we've been in part 1 of the lecture, which I just titled The Phallus. We're really close to kicking into part 2, which I call part 2, the phallus, ideology, and power. So we're close to getting to the main, the ideology stuff. When I was thinking about the various concepts we haven't discussed so far, and considering that you and I are kind of going to, I mean, as far as we know, taking a break from streaming, we wanted to connect our series so far. And
Right.
so the phallus was the best way to do that. The concept, because of how it can relate to ideology.
Yeah, and so it'll be a break. I mean, it's already been a break for streaming. You know, it's just I'm just grateful that we're getting to do this, and then but we definitely have plans for some really cool stuff. So you know, stay tuned or whatever. But it'll be a while.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be a while.
Right.
Yeah.
So before we get into the ideology stuff, I just want to make 2 more points about the phallus. Maybe a couple more, but so the reason the phallus or the phallic signifier is exceptional is because, in a sense, it stands outside the field of all other signifiers, right? Because it's the exceptional one. It's like the primal father. So the primal father is the one who gives the law, and is not his own subject of the law, right? And Lacan sees like the primary master signifier or the phallic signifier doing the same thing. And so it's unique because it's the signifier of signification as such. And what that means is it's the signifier you have to reckon with, or basically bow to, in order to get access to the whole field of meaning, right? Like, this is again why, for Lacan, psychotics don't exist in the field of meaning the way you and I do as neurotics, precisely because they have foreclosed, they have absolutely blocked out the no of the father, the signifier of law, the signifier of prohibition. And the point is, to make it a little clearer, so what the master signifier does is it organizes the whole social field, right? So let's get particular about it. So if Christianity, or we could say Jesus Christ, is the master signifier, then you're going to have a symbolic order that is completely oriented towards certain values. Certain things are prohibited, obviously. There's going to be a hierarchical order based on, the ladder of being, so to speak. You get a very particular symbolic order based on Christianity or Christ or the Christian God having the exceptional position. The position that says, I am the one who imposes the rules, values, norms, laws, etc. You're going to have a very different symbolic order if, what would we call it? Socialism or class consciousness, or, in the Soviet Union, Žižek says the master signifier was history, right? History in the sense of dialectical materialism, that kind of thing. So that gives you a different symbolic order. The point is, the master signifier imposes itself, and all of the world around it has to structure itself around the master signifier. And in that sense, it's the inaugural signifier. Now, you can't think of it in. It gets tricky when you think of it in temporal or historical terms. Like, at what moment did this master signifier? That's not clear. It's inaugural or first in a logical sense, right? Or in a positional sense of occupying that phallic position that gets to have the final say, right? Which, it's weird. It has the first say, but because it has the first say, it gets to always have the final say. And so that's what it means. Like, the master signifier or the phallic signifier is a signifier of signification itself, or of the symbolic order itself, right? Because if Christianity is the master signifier or Islam is the master signifier, then you're going to get an entire symbolic order that's Christian, or an entire symbolic order that is Islamic, right?
So
yeah.
So we've talked about the master signifier plenty, I think, at this point. And you're saying the phallus is the master signifier, or it's a master signifier?
And right, it gets tricky, right? Because the point is, the symbolic phallus would be, without question, it is the first master signifier. Because what it does is it makes you into a subject that can live in accordance with master signifiers. Like it's the master signifier of master signifiers, because it makes you the kind of subject that can be the subject of a master signifier, right? So if you're not willing to embrace the prohibition, in a sense, we talk about, like, I know it gets tricky when we talk about signifiers, but let's take it out. Let's bracket out the term. The point is, it's the governing principle, right? If you are not willing to have your life and social reality governed by the principle that you cannot do whatever you want, however you want, whenever you want, that you have to conform to external protocol, then you can't have any master signifiers, where you can't have any other governing principles. The prohibition, the name of the Father, the know of the Father, is the governing principle that make all other governing principles possible. It opens up the space for you to be governed, so to speak.
And then in any concrete, immediate social situation that you might be in, there are people who will attempt to fill that role, or there could be contesting agents.
Think about it. I mean, we're dealing with that. I mean, within the culture war and everything, you have certain Americans that will tell you should be a Christian. You have certain Americans that will tell you need to be a Republican. You have certain Americans that tell you need to be a Democrat. Some will tell you need to be a Marxist. Like, some tell you need to be a libertarian. But the point is, you can only adopt any of those as your master signifier or governing principle if you have accepted symbolic castration, if you have accepted that you have to live in accordance with some sort of external set of values and rules and protocols.
Right, and with most versions of what we experience as religion in the United States, that accepting would probably be accepting Jesus Christ into your heart. But it's also, accepting, there's certain things I'm not going to think critically about, or there's certain things that I'm not going to question. There's certain things that are beyond question for me. You've consigned over a certain, I would say your intellectual integrity most of the time.
This is
right?
Part of the appeal of the power that the phallic position has.
This is why we don't understand the, quote unquote Christian Žižekians, right? But it's like, if you are using philosophy and theory to do apologetics, to essentially just like rebrand a bunch of religious dogmas, or claims to truth, a specific worldview, or like your church or whatever it is that you're working out, it's like, I mean, you're not just castrating yourself in the sense of, you can't do whatever you want. You actually have to say no to certain things, like you can't commit adultery, or you can't lie, or you can't steal. It's not just those things. It's also, you can't question. You can't seriously question, right? Like you can't dwell with the problems and questions of philosophy the way that we do.
So
the way,
sense, yeah.
Yeah, I just kind of want to drive this home, because I think it's very popular right now for people to just, everybody wants to use philosophy and theory. Well, apologists and theologians and the priest class have always liked to use philosophy or
Catholic Church certainly did,
or scientific sounding words, to kind of bolster their claim to this power. Yeah, and it's like, but what I see at the end of the day is someone saying we essentially have to turn off our brains when it comes to X, Y, and Z things, and I'm just like, it's where you and I kind of come together. It's like you have a different relation to religion than I do, but we both are, as philosophers, in a kind of uneasy relation with our friends who are religious, and I think our friends who are religious who are still around have learned to tolerate us. And maybe they even appreciate the fact that we're able to do what we do to a certain extent because they've made certain choices and they're not going to do that. But
Yeah.
that basically comes down to a default kind of skepticism about anybody who's telling you, oh, you have to believe this, you have to do that. And so, I mean, but the thing is we're not just what you said, psychotics. I know you're not going to get too much into the structures, but we still recognize that there is power. Power needs to be wielded. Hopefully it's wielded towards better ends, whatever, Well, the point is when it comes to ideology and it comes to philosophy, the examine life, trying to think for ourselves, trying to understand what it is that we've been thrown into in this social world. You got to learn to see these claims to the master signification and these phallic maneuvers by ideologies and the ideologues that represent them. So yeah.
So my way of saying it, so I have, okay, first off, I just want to read this. So this is one of my favorite quotes from Žižek, and though he doesn't reference the phallus here, he is indirectly referencing it because he's talking about the master signifier, which we've said is the phallic signifier, symbolic phallus. Okay, or closely associated with it. So Žižek says in Tyranny with the negative, I believe this is from the preface, he says, this maintaining of a distance with regard to the master signifier characterizes the basic attitude of philosophy. Philosophy begins the moment we do not simply accept what exists as given. This, or it's like this, law is law, etc.
Right.
But raise the question of how is what we encounter as actual also possible, right? We don't take it as a given. We ask about the very, now that could be tricky. Now I'm kind of adding in some commentary. What he's saying there when he says, we raise the question of how is what we encounter as actual also possible. His point is the philosophers do not accept basic reality or basic authority as a given. We ask about the conditions that make that what it is. So we're going beyond, like the social authority would say, don't ask, shut your brain off. And philosophy says, no thanks, I'm going to keep my brain on and I'm going to keep questioning past this limit. We could even call this the philosopher's jouissance, right?
Oh, yeah. Of course.
So then Žižek says, what characterizes philosophy is this step back from actuality into possibility. Or, I think maybe a better way to put it is, what characterizes this step back from what is the contingent structure of the, quote, essential nature of things, right? And so then Žižek continues, theory involves the power to abstract from our starting point, and we just talked about what's the master signifier or the phallus? The inaugural signifier, it's the starting point, right? Theory involves the power to abstract from our starting point in order to reconstruct it subsequently on the basis of its presuppositions, its transcendental conditions of possibility. Theory as such, by definition, requires the suspension of the master signifier. That's what puts philosophy at odds with religion, but not just religion, but with science, with governments, with law codes, with authority figures. I mean, this is why they made Socrates drink the hemlock for this very reason.
Right.
And the point is, philosophy at its best is the critique of society's most basic presuppositions. Now, Lacan calls those basic presuppositions master signifiers. But that's, to me, I mean, I think that's, if that's not the core job of philosophy, it's certainly up there. I think I might argue it is the main one.
Right. You know, you wrote that piece that was that short blog post that was saying philosophy is making concepts, you know, the way that D&G, you know, say that it is. You know, so it's definitely making concepts. But it's also, I think you're right. This is primary over and above, you know, developing concepts to better understand things.
Your theory of time energy is philosophical precisely because you're challenging one of the basic presuppositions or master signifiers of capitalism, which is to say, it's the more you work, the better off. Like it's the work ethic. It's the more work, like all of that kind of work ethic shit that capitalism uses as primary form of its ideology. That's what time energy as a philosophical concept is challenging.
Right.
You're challenging a key master signifier of capital.
Well, yeah, you can't understand the concept without then seeing the phenomenon everywhere. And once you see the phenomenon everywhere, when people are like, oh yeah, you can develop yourself and be actualized outside of the workplace on your free time, it's like you're going to see right through that.
Let's talk about it. Whether it's self-help or it's that organization that I came across that I told you, you know, about the what is it? The Flow Research Collective.
Yeah. Yeah.
What you have is you have people who have noticed this issue that you know, especially Americans, they're exhausted. They don't have time or energy to engage in meaningful activities. But instead of actually challenging capitalism and its master signifier of the work ethic or whatever, it tries to turn it around and actually profit off of this by trying to sell you some sort of like insight in how to better manage your time and energy and bullshit. And it's a complete way of servicing capital instead of challenging it. Like it's anti-philosophy, and not in like the way that term. I mean, it's against philosophy, right? It's in the service of the status quo.
Right. Well, and let's go back to so there's making a concept that, you know, throws a wrench into things, but then there's also going back to that Žižek quote that you use about the, you know, stepping back from the actual and considering what makes it possible. Well, what is the actual? The actual is our lives are reduced to labor power. All of our time, our most formative years, and then our, you know, through schooling and into the workforce is to develop us to be a reliable, qualified version of some kind of labor power, or someone who's supposed to manage it. You know,
and that is not just the way things are.
No, that's not just the way things are. No, and then people say time is money, you know, and so there's like this sense that, you know, they're somehow related, and people have this sense that maybe they're trading their time for money, and so they could just trade enough of their time away and stop thinking about, you know, consuming right now, and they'd be able to amass enough wealth that they'd be able to work their way out of poverty or whatever. And it's like there's all of these ideas and these signifiers that, and these sort of pre-theoretic interpretations that we bring to the world with us. And so the concept and the phenomenon, it comes from stepping back from these things, from taking these things for granted and saying, let's stop using the words people tend to use for these things and just call it what it is. What is it? Right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I want to say one thing, and then because we're already kind of there.
Almost done with this part. Almost done with part one. Are we almost done with part one?
Yeah, we're one more point, and then we'll pivot into the stuff on ideology.
Well, thank God.
And power.
All right.
Okay, I just want to say, okay, if you read Žižek, you'll often find that when he talks about the master signifier, he links it to objet petit a. And again, at this point, I'm presupposing people know what that is, but if you don't, it's this surplus that we posit that there is a remainder of the sublime enjoyment, the purified, concentrated enjoyment we had prior to becoming conformed to the law and sacrificing this enjoyment on the altar of society in order to become a member of society. And this remnant or surplus of jouissance is constantly what keeps us desiring. It causes us to desire because we think we're going to find it in this object or that object, right? It's the ultimate fantasy object. Whenever you desire something in your fantasy, it's because you think that object that you're picturing or imagining has this surplus attached to it, and it's going to make you whole again. You're going to have the purified jouissance you once had, which you never really had to begin with, but nonetheless, that's you think you're going to get your lost enjoyment back. So here's the thing, right? So we've been through Lacan, we've talked about the imaginary, the symbolic, and the real. Well, the unique thing about the master signifier is that in a way, even though it's a signifier, it's positioned in the real to some degree, like, which is to say, well, you want to go, well, how the hell, why would that be? It's because it's the signifier that exists outside of the rest of the symbolic order. It's the exception. Just like the primal father existed in an exceptional space outside of the rest of his tribe or horde, so too does the master signifier have a kind of exteriority in relation to the rest of the symbolic order, the rest of the field of meaning. And because of that, it's in this location that's outside of the symbolic order. Well, that outside of the symbolic order is also the position of objet petit a, or jouissance as such. And the point that Žižek likes to make is that this is why master signifiers have such a strong libidinal charge for us. It's because they're so closely, like, if we talk in topological terms, this is why Lacan was big on topology, because he wanted us to think all of these concepts.
Which is what, making maps? Like,
yeah, like he wants us to think in terms of space, right? Like, there's the field of meaning, there's the symbolic order, right? Which is to say, it's the structure or the skeleton of society. Then there's our actual, perceptual experiences of things as objects with colors and shapes and everything. That's the imaginary or the perceptual, but Lacan calls it the imaginary. And then there's the gaps within this reality, and we don't notice these gaps very often. Moments of trauma are one example, but there are gaps or points in which, like, this field, this topological space, gets twisted or knotted together, and these are points of what he calls the real, and they constitute this field for us, and yet they're absent from it in a way. Like, you don't notice them the way you notice the rest of it. And I mean, you could talk almost like how you have the universe, but then it has black holes, but the black holes play an essential role in the structure of the universe, right. That kind of thing. So for him, there are things that belong in the real that aren't immediately present to us in our conscious awareness of reality, yet those things are essential to the constitution of reality. So jouissance is one of them, drive is one of them, our fundamental fantasy, and master signifiers. Now, master signifiers might not be as unconscious, I mean, because you can start to think about it, like, as an ideological subject, you can kind of figure out, like, yeah, I'm big on Islam, or I'm big on Buddhism, or whatever, right? Point is, though, the reason we get so invested in these signifiers is because we make this unconscious link or association to, this signifier has a unique access or relation to my lost jouissance. So that's why there's so much at stake in our relationships to our master signifiers, because those master signifiers, like, what hangs in the balance is us regaining objet a, because they have a very close link, right?
So Yeah, why?
Okay, so the phallus and objet, right?
Yeah.
The phallus is the object that has the power to bestow the objet petit a. That is, I've tried for a long time to figure out what the relationship between phallus and objet a is. I think that might be the most succinct way of putting it. Like, that's what the imaginary phallus for the kid is. Like, oh, it's the thing that gives one the power to give enjoyment or have enjoyment. It's not objet a, but it's the object that gives us a certain special power over jouissance. And so, in this sense, we link excessive enjoyment, sublime jouissance, to the phallic position. And this is why the master signifier could be said to possess objet petit a, because it exists in this exceptional position. Now, I know, like, this is high level Lacanian theory, and this is just one of these points where, because it presupposes the three registers, because it involves topology, and especially the weird kind of twisted topology Lacan has in mind of knots and of deadlocks, it is complicated. I admit that.
Well, it sounds arbitrary and contrived. If you, I understand, like, if you read, for instance, because I'll just say though, like, you know, I do believe that
I'm making a link without explaining why the link is there.
Right, and I'll just say this though, like, I hope, because most people who are probably clicking onto something to listen to something about Lacan and Žižek are based enough in it, maybe, that they go, oh, well, that's a dumb question. I already know all this other stuff about why that is. But one of the things that frustrates us is that people never talk about what they're talking about or why. And so, you know, I think, you know, so I'm not just Morty to your Rick in this conversation. It's not that my levels of stupid are balancing out your levels of genius.
Have the answer.
But it's that, well, yeah, it's also that I have, like, a sense for, like, that's going to sound alien and contrived to somebody who's not used to the discourse. Yeah.
Then let's fix it. And here's the thing.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you questions because you already have the answer. Okay, we're doing some, like, Plato's Meno shit. Like, I'm coming to you for the geological or geometric proof. Okay, because you already have the knowledge. Okay, why is there a profound link or association between phallus / master signifier and objet a, which is la jouissance? Okay, as a child, when it's time to embrace prohibition and accept rules, regulations, or customs, you as a child have to sacrifice what?
Freedom, like your volition.
What do you give up?
Your will.
What do you give up to become a member of society? What do you have to sacrifice?
Oh God. There's
jouissance.
Well, I know but that's the question. My question is why though? Like,
why? Because here's the thing. The point is, and again, this is the retroactive thing. But the point, okay, I'm just going to say it. Fuck it.
Without thank God. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Without the qualifications, the kid takes it that I have a certain freedom to enjoy prior to. I don't want to do what you say. Quit telling me I have to do what you say. The kid wants to live in this freedom of jouissance. I do what I do whenever I want. If I want to suck the tit, I suck the tit. If I want to shit, I shit. I eat when I want to eat. I make noises that I like whenever I make noises. There are no rules or structures on their behavior as an infant or as a small child. Okay? They get to do whatever they want. They're not subjects of law yet, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But here's the thing. Can we have a functional society where people shit wherever they want, or touch people however they want, or do whatever they want? No. So if we're going to have any kind of social organization, prohibitions have to be put on us, and restrictions on our behavior have to be accepted.
But it's not just lost jouissance in this case, it's also lost pleasure, right? So it's both.
But it's taken as okay. So pleasure would just be, well, yeah. Because look, that gets more. It gets complicated because for people like me and Todd and Žižek, there's like a dialectic. Like pleasure is kind of baked in dialectically, jouissance and vice versa.
They're they're dialectically related. Okay, that's fair enough.
That makes it harder on the listener. So let's bracket that shit out.
Okay.
The point is, you have a kind of, you take yourself to have the freedom to have access to whatever preferred enjoyment you have at any moment.
Okay.
Okay. Then, and that involves traditionally a connection in some way, shape, or form to your primary caregiver, an access to your primary caregiver. Okay. So when somebody steps in and says, hey, you can't have this source of enjoyment whenever you want it, however you want it, then you take yourself, like, I have to give this up to the authority figure. This is like, it's the price. Like, I'm paying, like, it's like paying to get into a nightclub. Okay, all right, I can't stay here forever. I have to become a socialized subject. How do I gain access to this club, to this membership? Oh, instead of paying in money, I have to pay in my enjoyment or my freedom, which in a sense, and this is true, freedom and jouissance they share a strong connection in Lacanian theory. So that's the point.
Freedom and jouissance too?
Yeah, because like if you were to actually be able to enjoy everything you want, that's a kind of freedom.
Right.
It would destroy your life,
right.
But it's a kind of freedom, right? And this is exactly why Lacan will link Kant to Sade. This I don't want to go into, but I'm just making a point that Kant's moral theory and his concept of the law, Lacan actually thinks is homologous, similar in structure to Kant or to the Marquis de Sade's libertinism, which is to say, but here's the point, right? One of them seems to, you would think like, oh, it's the complete sacrifice of enjoyment. The other one seems to be the absolute ethics of never sacrificing your enjoyment. How the fuck can these things be related? But that's what Lacan tries to show, is that actually they're far closer than you think, which is to say jouissance and freedom are actually closer connected. So, but I'm just hinting at this connection. I'm not going into it right now. Here's the point. You have to give up. And again, and I make this qualification because we don't have this mythical enjoyment, but you have to give up this mythical enjoyment that you don't actually have as a sacrifice to become a social subject. And you do this by embracing, okay, there's external authority figures that are going to tell me what to do and how to behave, and I have to accept that and just deal with it and accept it if I'm going to have a functional life in society. Now, if I've given over my jouissance to the position of authority, doesn't that mean that the position of authority has it? This is why authority has a strong libidinal dimension to it, because it's as if it's the storage space of all of our enjoyment. We gave it over to authority, we gave it over to the no, to prohibition. It's as if we take it to exist there. Like it actually is like a bank or something. Like the social authority is this bank that has all of our jouissance that we've sacrificed.
That's a good analogy. So, yeah, I think that when I was listening over the older episodes, whenever you talk about objet petit a or little a, you've brought up this loss, this primordial loss of jouissance, and then you always say, but it's not real. It's a myth. It's a mythical, retroactive construction. But I was just kind of beating myself up for not having asked sooner. For you to go more in depth into that, because it is something that you hear people say a lot. So
So to make it clear, right? So the point is for the child, and we're talking about this unconscious logic. Like, we're not thinking this shit at the conscious level. We're making these unconscious associations that are going to govern our lives, right? But we're not aware of them. But this is why people can get so invested in whatever signifier or principle or presupposition or doctrine that occupies the position of authority in their life. Because what they think is that this authority, if I play along with it, if I placate it, I can get my jouissance out of it somehow. The person who takes my jouissance is the one who actually can give it back to me.
and so you're saying this is just working at like sort of in your unconscious, you just have this sense that if you could be that person, then you could have that, or if you could satisfy that person, then you could
Or
get
if
it.
I could be in that person's good graces, right?
And so
Well,
this
okay,
this
maybe
sets
they
up
make an exception for me.
right. So this kind of sets up. Does this set up like the two main relations to the phallus, which is like having versus being?
Well, so here's the thing: we don't have enough time tonight because I got some other stuff I got to do tonight. Like I had a part that I was gonna do on a little bit on sexuation and the having and the being. If we go that, we're not gonna be able to do the stuff on ideology, just time restraints. So I think it's best, like, you and I at some point will talk about sexuation. So I think it's better to just save it for then.
Well, I mean, we got to say something about it because at this point we've.
But it takes two. It's so. It's like a whole. The having the phallus versus being the phallus is really like a discussion by itself. It's big. Like, that's his early theory of sexual difference.
But I mean, at this point, we've talked about men this, men that, men this, men that, and we've, I think we kind of qualified at the beginning that this doesn't have to be a biologically a sexed or essentialist thing because really it's about a position. And so I just would, if we're not going to actually get into it, then I'll just say that, yeah, there's basically, though, how you develop as a subject, you're gonna have basically one of two positions in relation to the phallus, and one is like you have the feeling of like needing to have it, and then the other is needing to be it. And in order to have it, you've got to have somebody who is in the role of kind of confirming that you have it. And then the traditional way of conception, it's the you're successful because you have the most beautiful woman, right? And so this is how sexuation gets involved. This is why gender is involved.
Like, okay,
we don't have to get into it, but
yeah, I'm just telling you, like, I want to do a whole episode on sexuation, which will deal with the early stuff in seminars. I think that's 4 through 6, stuff like that. And then what he does in seminar 20, which is, I mean, some Lacanians think seminar 20 is his greatest seminar. But again, it's just, that's a whole conversation unto itself. And like I say, so here's the point. Like, the other thing I want to say, though, when we're talking about this relationship to phallus and objet, which is to say, the position of authority and lost jouissance, right? So the objet petit a is sacrificed and surrendered to the symbolic phallus, that is, to the position of authority. Remember, in seminar 7, Lacan says that jouissance is evil. Now, that's important, right?
I didn't remember that.
Okay, so that's one of the spots where he talks about jouissance as evil, because the point is, if everyone just pursues their jouissance without regard for anyone else, you're going to have a lot of evil shit go down, basically, because the point is you're not going to take the other into regard. And so for him, society is essentially based around the imposition or the prohibition of jouissance, which means that society says it's good, and this lethal substance, if it's allowed to run amok, is evil. So jouissance, you could say, is like the psychoanalytic name for sin, right?
Right.
So, but here we go. So, this is from the Post, right? And that's why I brought up the whole thing about jouissance is evil. It'll make sense in a second.
Okay.
The symbolic phallus is the signifier of jouissance, enjoyment. Now, see, that seems, you want to go, well, wait, no, it's not. Like, how could the thing that prohibits jouissance can't be the signifier that, it can't be the signifier of jouissance. It can't be the thing that means, like, but here's how it works. As we know, the phallic signifier is the first signifier, or the signifier of the signified in general, symbolic order, precisely because it signifies something absent, substantial phallus, imaginary phallus, libidinal power. But it also signifies the absence of jouissance, of the subject's lack of enjoyment. It's as if the phallic signifier literally confiscates our jouissance and locks it away inside of itself, that our lost enjoyment is actually contained inside of the signifier. A great way to think about this is through an analogy. The phallic signifier is like the puzzle box in Clive Barker's Hellraiser. This box has the power to open up a gateway to another hellish dimension of reality, filled with the most hellish and extreme and violent forms of jouissance. When opened, various torture devices appear alongside with 4 monstrous sadomasochistic figures called the Cenobites. Frank, a man who opened the box, says of it, it's dangerous. It opened doors to the pleasures of heaven and hell. I didn't care which. I thought I'd gone to the limits. I hadn't. The Cenobites gave me an experience beyond the limits. Pain in pleasure, indivisible. The lead Cenobite, named Pinhead in the sequels, says, you solved the box. We came. Now you must come with us. Taste our pleasures. Simply put, jouissance is in the puzzle box, phallic signifier. There is a fundamental association we make at the unconscious level between the phallic signifier and objet petit a, the surplus of lost enjoyment. And so that's why I love that example from Hellraiser, is it gets at this strange link. Because for so long, I mean, I couldn't begin to figure out why Žižek kept making this link between master signifier and objet a. It seemed completely random. But you have to go back to this whole thing about symbolic castration, and I have to give over my enjoyment to authority, right? And that, anything that indicates or stands in this position of authority, we unconsciously assume has access or has some sort of ability to gift us with jouissance, or to take jouissance from others, which is just as important. And so I'll just conclude the first part real quick by saying that there are various ways Lacan and Lacanians talk about the symbolic phallus. They say that it is the signifier. They say that the phallic signifier is 1, the signifier without a signified; 2, the signifier of signification itself, or the signified in general; 3, the signifier of castration; 4, the signifier of lack; 5, the signifier of desire; 6, the signifier of jouissance; 7, the signifier of power; and 8, the signifier of sexual difference. Now, see, that's why there's so much confusion. And I just want to say, I'm not going to go into all that, but I do in the blog post. I touch on each one of those
quite thoroughly.
And so, but that's why it's so fucking complicated whenever Lacanians are talking about this shit. There are so many valences or connotations or associations in this concept that unless somebody is going to unpack them, it'll never mean shit.
Right.
And so, okay, that's that. And now let's talk about politics and jouissance, and we'll get into the whole stuff. Okay. So you and I have talked a lot in our Žižek series about the role that jouissance plays in politics. And Todd McGowan has, his new book is coming out. It's called Enjoying Right and Left. Todd has taken so much of what Žižek does on enjoyment in politics or enjoyment in ideology and concretized it, where he applies it to even more concrete, specific examples than Žižek does. And so McGowan ends up talking about right jouissance, left jouissance, and he's trying to think through these connections even more so than Žižek does a lot of the time. And so I just want to start this part by quoting Todd, who says, politics gives a form to our enjoyment. Political campaigns offer the promise of a specific form of enjoyment to those who support them. This is why people have such an investment in politics and in political struggle. It provides a way of organizing our enjoyment so that the possibility for this enjoyment appears maximized, or the threat that others pose to it appears minimalized. Enjoyment actually plays a determinative role in what a society looks like. One political leader might promise to allow people to take pride in and enjoy their nation by ridding it of outsiders. Another might offer the enjoyment as a collective sacrifice to fight climate change. A third might propose completely transforming capitalist society into a communist alternative. A social order's political structure emerges out of a struggle between competing forms of enjoyment, such as these. The struggle itself reveals the nature of these competing forms of enjoyment. We do not have to wait for the realization of the political program to grasp the operative form of enjoyment. It is apparent within the struggle itself. Every political position that people take up already demonstrates the form of enjoyment that they hope will prevail. How one enjoys define how how one enjoys defines how one functions as a political actor. Okay, so I really like that quote, but what I want to add to this discussion is this, and I've already said it, right? Now we just have to apply it. Why do people, especially political actors, often have such a strong investment in authority figures, right? Because what is at stake in the authority figure is our jouissance. And not just our jouissance, but your children's jouissance, your family's enjoyment, right? And so power, often people who are pursuing power, people who want to maintain power, they have to play the game of the phallus in order to maintain that power or to get that power. And so just like, we've talked about, like the bully fails to be a phallic figure, though that's exactly what he's trying to be. Well, politicians end up doing this same kind of thing in various ways, right? And so the key, though, is, okay, so there's the subject's libidinal investment in power because they think a particular person in power can gain access to enjoyment or will grant them enjoyment, that somehow enjoyment will flow out of this person having power. But the ideology of power is in how power obfuscates the traumatic real of society's structural problems. So that's the thing, right? Like there's a certain allure to powerful figures because you think, oh, they can step in as phallic, right? As having the exceptional masculine substance. And they can fight their way through all of the structural gridlock, systematic problems and solve the problems, right?
Right, like now, they have the it factor that makes it possible to get the things that you need done. They have it. They got it. And even if you think like a reformist kind of like, well, it's going to take a lot of time and they're not going to get as much done as I need. Well, yeah, but you expect that this is still like that they're best suited to get you what you want in this situation.
Exactly, right? And we have to realize, so in the young child's mind, they associate power with a particular figure. they're not Foucauldians. They don't view it as like this systematic dispersal of power in various positions, right? They're thinking about it as this exceptional figure has the power. And this is why certain types of figures, when it comes to politics, have such a strong libidinal appeal to people. They're like, okay, like this, like, fuck all of this, like all the policy bullshit and all of the parties bullshit. This person is exceptional and can, I mean, look, and you know the example, you know, oh, he can drain the swamp.
Oh yeah. Well, and
Right?
you were talking, obviously to the liberal, Trump is a bully, and so as far as like but the thing is the what is a phallic signifier for an educated person who thinks that we need to have a sort of measured response to everything and everything like this, and that the role requires a certain degree of decorum and maturity and all of this, then obviously like this phallic display Trump is laughable, but also like horrific. Like, how could anybody possibly appreciate this? This is not statesmanship. This is going to get us into a world war or whatever. That's the thought process. And you already talked about it in the first episode, but like, the point is no, that's why it doesn't resonate with a liberal. But the point, what's actually resonating for the Trump base is something else going on with jouissance.
Exactly. Right. And here's the point, right? So the authority figure, the exceptional one, promises to restore a lost enjoyment of a nostalgic past, right? So, I mean, we can call this fascistic, but I mean, in a sense, like, what was Biden's whole thing? Like, he wanted to bring normality back, right?
Back to normal.
Back to normal. So that's also an appeal to some kind of enjoyment we've lost due to Trump. And Trump saying we've lost, a certain enjoyment because of X, Y, and Z. And so politicians on both sides do this same shit. And so, hold on. A particular Phallus. Oh, go ahead.
They appeal to similar structures, or to the same kind of bullshit. So, I mean, you'll find this in like, there's different versions of the, people are good, or natural people are good, and civilization is a fall from that goodness, or that the civilizations reach a certain point where they then deteriorate from that peak goodness that they got. And there's different versions of this. There is like a particularly fascist version of it, but then there's also like, there's like the I don't know, sort of third worldist, anarcho-indigenous kind of way of thinking about it, where it's just like, oh, well, we, the oppressed, we're good, and we're of the good. We're part of that natural goodness, and the bad people, they're the ones, the white people, the colonizers, the imperialists, the whatever. They're responsible for, causing us to lose our sense for what's good and what's true, or how to be on this earth, and so anything that we've done bad, it's they've caused it. All of this is still presupposing the same basic structures. What I'm trying to say. And so any sort of religious rhetoric and meta narrative that kind of presupposes like there is a natural goodness that has been deviated from, and this authority figure that represents this ideology is able to get us back to that thing, that golden moment, or that innocence of youth or whatever.
A historical sweet spot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so but a particular phallic signifier is a politician's ability to get away with shit that no one else can. So that's one way you can indicate that you are the exceptional phallic figure, right? Well, that's exactly what worked for Trump. Trump kept getting away with doing shit and saying shit nobody else could get away with.
Right.
And because of that, that is part of the appeal of him, is that he's breaking the law of the status quo in Washington. He's breaking the general etiquette, the general speech patterns, the polished way politicians talk. He's making the obscene jokes. He's, flirting with racist shit, and, sometimes very explicitly and other times whatever. Point is, he was talking and saying and acting in a way that was at odds with the status quo of Washington. And so this is what signifies this guy has the power to change things, right? I mean, a funny example is really God in the Bible, right? God has the power to get away with doing all kinds of unlawful things, genocide, plagues, killing the firstborn in Egypt, all of this shit that if anybody you read, in any other book doing it,
you'd be like,
you'd be horrified by.
Wow, this guy's a bad guy. Yeah.
Right, but in the Bible, like this only proves that God deserves to be the lawgiver, right? Because he can do all this.
He's the sovereign exception, yeah.
Exactly, right? And the sovereign exception, and the exception is phallic. So, the phallic figure is often the one who transgresses and authorizes the transgression of the law of the status quo, which, again, that's what, the whole thing, with what happened at the Capitol and Trump, doing it, like, that's what gets the enjoyment flowing in those types of situations where, like, there's a certain type of enjoyment you can get from having a sub law that validates or authorizes the transgression of the explicit status quo law. And so if you think the status quo law is actually bad or oppressive or whatever, then a counter law, it can actually be a facilitator of jouissance. And so I like how Todd talks about it. And again, this quote too is from his forthcoming book from Sublation Media, Enjoying Right and Left. So Todd says, let's quickly look at the 2020 presidential election in the United States. Donald Trump promised to sustain a nationalist and ethnocentric enjoyment that he successfully unleashed in his one term as president. He organized enjoyment through the slogan, "Make America Great Again," which allowed partisans to enjoy the excess of the American nation, to bask in the nation's worst transgressions without any apology needed, and to believe in their racial superiority. Trump licensed acting without regard for the limitations that govern the social order. As a Trump supporter, one could beat protesters with impunity, identify with racist police violence, or wear a baseball hat that would offend polite liberal society. To identify with Trump was also to enjoy his transgressions. One could vicariously grab them by the pussy, swindle investors, hobnob with celebrities like Tom Brady, insult one's enemies without repercussion, and even partake in incestuous comments about his daughter's sex appeal. Trump's own transgressions turned him into a source of enjoyment for his followers. The transgressions did not detract from his appeal, but were utterly central to it, since they provided the avenue for Trump supporters to enjoy in ways that they otherwise couldn't. His policies pushed this enjoyment even further. Like Trump, in a political setting, he, especially the way that liberals viewed him, he really is kind of this primal father, right? Like,
yeah,
the way that he's, he does what he wants, he says what he wants, he doesn't, no regard, whatever. I mean, he's embodying the man in the sense of the primal father, and that again is what gave him such. I mean, love him or hate him, you got to admit that he did this in a way that, Bush and Clinton and Bush Sr. and even Obama Like, I mean, Obama, like you were talking about, like his phallic signifier would have been his like calm, collected, decent. Like
Right.
he was a very well, like what's the best word? Like decorum is really just the best word for him, and that indicated his great maturity and all of that. But you flip it, like no one is like as a modern politician in America has embodied like primal father type shit like Trump, and that was Freud talks about the unary trait, and that's what Lacan calls it. But essentially, and this is from his book on what is it? God, I'm drawing a blank on the term. It's the one on like social psychology. Hold on, I'm drawing a blank again.
The unary. What's unary mean?
Yeah, hold on.
You said that was a question. You just said yeah to.
I know I'm not really listening. Hold on.
I've kind of figured. What's up, Chad? How's it going over there? Someone said Jericho did nothing wrong. I don't know who Jericho is. Is that to do with the buffalo horns and the face tats or the face paint? Because if that was in reference to the January 6th thing.
No, they're talking about like Jericho in the Bible. You say Jericho to me, and I think Chris Jericho, but it's the walls of Jericho in the Bible, the city.
Then why say Jericho did nothing wrong in reference to what we were just talking about?
Because God fucked them up.
Oh.
We're talking about God doing whatever he wanted in the Old Testament.
Oh. Gotcha. And fair enough. You used what? Because the city didn't want to take them in, right? As opposed to like Sodom and Gomorrah, where it was like actually a bunch of rapists and they kind of had it coming, So no, I mean, how about the entire population of all humans on the earth except for Noah's family did nothing wrong?
Well, my favorite example is 2 Kings chapter 2. That's where the prophet Elijah, or it's Elijah, is going around and he's prophesying, and because some kids at the entrance of some city, they start mocking him. And okay, so there's Elijah and then there's Elijah. There's two of them, right? And the second one is the protege of the former, if you want to call him protege, whatever.
Sure.
The replacement prophet. And so they had heard the stories of Elijah going to heaven on a chariot of fire, I guess. And so the kids look at the replacement prophet and they start going, go up thou bald head, go up thou bald head, which all the Christians I know interpret that. I guess he had a bald head, but
yeah.
If you're really a prophet, fly up to heaven.
Yeah,
and so,
they might as well be calling him a fat fuck,
Right, exactly. So for these young boys doing this, God has two bears come out of the woods and maul them and tear them to shreds. And it says, there's 42 of them or 48 of them that were mauled by bears because they were breaking the prophet's balls. So they had to, be ripped apart by wild animals.
That's a lot. That's a lot of bullying youths.
Well, you don't fuck with the prophet.
There's like 48 of them. Go up, bald man.
I know, right?
God's all. Just hold on a sec. I'm gonna wreck these kids.
Yeah. Well, I'm bald. Imagine me going for a walk around my lake and some kid calling me bald, and I don't have a pit bull, but imagine I did, and just go get him, teach him a lesson, like, this kind of shit. But
yeah.
That's what God. You remember that song? I think I sent it to you. It's like a gospel song, and it's like, he'll fuck you up. He fucked him up. God really fucked him up. Like,
no, I did not. No, but I do have that the gory illustrated book that you recommended.
Did you buy a copy of it?
I did, yeah. So,
okay.
what that's about, everybody. Basically, just it's a book that has like it
It's
seems.
almost some shit. Hold on. It's some shit that Tyler Durden would do if he worked Sundays at a Bible study,
Right.
like
Yeah.
Bible school.
Yeah, it's like, any illustrated Bible stories, except it's all the ones that you wouldn't want illustrated because they're going to give the kids nightmares, So it's pretty funny. Anyway,
The bears ripping the kids apart is in it. Yeah, it's on the cover.
that's in there, yeah.
Anyway, so okay, back on track.
Yeah, anyway.
The Freud thing, we're talking about unary trait. It's a concept that comes out of group psychology and the analysis of the ego. And for Freud, he's trying to talk about how when it comes to any kind of social group or whatever, there's some primary trait that they as a collective identify with, and that's what unites them as a group. I don't like this term. I think it's confusing, and Lacan uses it. A lot of times it seems like it's doing what master signifier does or whatever, but I don't know, and I've never had a Lacanian give me like a precise definition of it. I just think it's better to go with Freud and just say, look, it's the trait or the characteristic that is the trait of collective identification. Point is, like in the case of Trump supporters, it's the unary trait is a form of enjoyment. It's the excesses of his enjoyment that he had, that they, he's owning the libtards, he's offending liberals, and that is the primary form of enjoyment they identified with.
Right. And I could enjoy it too if it wasn't for the fact that I have so many who are friends. Side of it all, right? Like if it was just giving them all a hard time, that'd be one thing. But instead, it also turns out to be like, the Muslim ban, where people's entire lives are kind of thrown off course because they're not allowed to fly into the country and do the things that they're supposed to be able to do to see their family or what have you. Like that's real world shit. It's not just trolling the libs anymore. It's actual. Yeah, but anyway. Oh, I cut out
a little bit. It was just choppy.
Okay. Well, all I was saying was
better now. You sound better now.
Okay. Well, all I was saying is that there's real world shit on the other side of it all. It's not just. I would be able to enjoy it, honestly, just seeing people get so upset about it. Except that at the same time, I also understand there's real world implications behind these policies and things. So it's not just fun and games. But people treat it like it is just fun and games, or.
Yeah. So part of the appeal of the phallus bearer, though, the phallus figure, is how how one thinks this figure relates to the quote thieves of enjoyment, the ideological scapegoats, right? Like, the whole point of look, when Žižek talks about anti-Semitism and Nazi ideology, he always emphasizes the role of how the Jews were scapegoated. They became phantasmatic Jews instead of actual real people. And to say they were phantasmatic Jews, it means that they were presented as being the ones who monopolize enjoyment, take the enjoyment of the good, hardworking German people, right?
Right.
And but what he doesn't emphasize is how Hitler himself was an incredible phallic figure, right? Like that was the whole point of his rise to power. Is and you see him banging on the podiums and his incredibly aggressive mannerisms and all this kind of shit. Like it was because people bought him as a phallic figure that they ended up buying his narrative that scapegoated the Jews, right? And so I think it's important when we talk about that aspect is to part of the scapegoating has to do with the fact that Hitler was the phallic figure for them. And so the phallic figure, insofar as the phallic figure is a political leader, is pure ideology. Insofar as this figure leads one to believe that social unity, a contradictionless society, a social order without antagonisms is actually possible if they just get power. And that's the thing, right? None of these motherfuckers ever make good on what they claim they're going to do. The swamp did not get drained. Germany was not restored to its former. Like, what they end up doing is just making shit worse. And, like, especially, like, what happened with the Holocaust was so horrible that Germany, it was like a wake-up call for them. We as a country haven't had our wake-up call, because what I think Trump just paved the way for somebody even worse.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, we haven't actually, he's not the worst phallic political leader we can have. And that's what sucks. It's like, we haven't had our wake-up call. It's probably going to get a lot worse before it gets better. So, but that's the thing, right? So there's enjoyment in clinging to your phallic figure because you think they're gonna give you the enjoyment you've lost. But the flip side is liberals got incredible enjoyment from hating Trump, right? Like, liberals still have trouble, like, breaking their libidinal investment in their hatred of Trump. And I think that actually has helped to keep him around. Like, they just love to hate him so much that, you know, there's an investment there. And so it's just like, there is an enjoyment you can get in, like, humiliating the bully. Like, you do want to kick the bully when the bully's down, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the type of enjoyment that fuels a lot of liberalism. Or liberal leftists. And so
oh yeah. Or that, yeah, there's the enjoyment of getting attention, even if it's negative attention, of being considered important enough to be controversial. And so there's the person who kind of takes the flack from the bully, and then there's the people who defend the bully, and they get their enjoyment as well, you know, from, so it's like,
and that's part of it. Like, there's enjoyment in clinging to the phallic figure, and there's enjoyment in transgressing and humiliating him. The Žižekian point would be, well, you're trapped in a loop. No matter what side you're on of it, you're just reproducing this loop. And the key is to say, I would prefer not to, which is to say, I'm not, okay, I can sit here and say this person isn't good for the country. I'm not going to vote for him, or I'm going to vote against them, or I want to help, like, actively get this person out of a position of power, while not being libidinally invested in that person, good or bad.
Hating Trump or being the resistance is not a personality, and it's not a politics, you know.
And so, yeah, like, for me, I'm certainly not going to love Trump, but I'm not going to do the hate Trump shit either. And I had my moments of that, but I don't know. Žižek, like, honestly,
nothing gives a phallic person more power than, like, the impression that he makes his enemies cry and want to punch pillows.
Well, yeah, or that, like, he must be stopped. Doesn't that indicate that he has the power? Like, he's so threatening that we have to have, like, special types of organization against him. Like, it proves the phallic point. It's like, you know, it proves the fallacy of the phallus.
The fallacy of the phallus, which is a word you play with in this piece.
You know what's funny? I told you, well, like, so spoiler alert, I do plan on writing a book on Lacanian gender theory or sexuation or whatever you want to call it. This is down the road. This is years away. But I really wanted to call it fallacy. Do you know there's a book on gender theory already called that? So
no.
It exists. It's on Amazon. I checked. So
I bet it's not. I bet it's not very good.
Well, still, like, I'm not gonna. I'm not just gonna straight up.
No,
the type.
probably
I
best
really wanted
not
to. Call it
to.
fallacy. But
Cool.
so I think this is as good a place to wind down as we've got. And you know what? Here's the thing. I think this is the first time we've really gotten through all of the main parts I wanted to get through.
Really?
Yeah. I'm not going to lie. I do have extra stuff we could talk about, but I'm not going to do it. I'm just not. It's too. I'm ready to wind down.
Well, it's seemingly impossible to get you to ever give the rest of what you're going to get into in broad strokes, just okay, but what else but I have gotten you to do it before. Like for instance, there's a whole litany of concepts, some of which we did end up getting into that you talk about at the end of episode 1, the Lacan episode 1.
All right, okay. I'll give you a little bonus.
Yeah, what else goes into it, I guess?
So there is a third part to this lecture, and it's called From Bad to Worse. And what this is getting at is this is like the big topic in Lacanian academia right now. So Dwayne Roussel, Dwayne Roussel, if you guys don't know who he is, he's one of my favorite Lacanian theorists. He's written, like, my favorite book by Dwayne so far is one called Jacques Lacan and American Sociology. I really love that book. But he's got a lot of other ones. He just released one on the concept of love. If you haven't checked out Dwayne's work, check it out. But Dwayne has recently been in I don't even want to call it a debate. It's a ongoing discussion with Žižek. And Dwayne has organized a conference that is going on. I think it starts today, and it's the next 3 days. Todd McGowan's lecturing at it. Žižek's lecturing at it. Alenka Zupancic is lecturing at it. Dwayne,
holy shit.
Yeah, it's all the big names. Matthew Fleischvetter, I believe, is going to be there. A lot of big names in Lacanian theory.
Lots of important people, all the biggest names.
Yeah, all the biggest people. It's going to be the greatest Lacan conference ever.
If there's an it to be had, you can say that they've got it. Yes. Yeah.
But don't get it wrong. Lacan and Freud, they're not the greatest psychoanalytic theorists. That is yours truly.
Yeah.
I'm the best. Just wait till you read my Acree.
Yeah. So anyway, that's happening right now.
Conference. So here's the point of the conference.
Yeah, what's the debate?
So there's a ongoing thing. Žižek's talked about it in Ticklish Subject and a million other places. Jody Dean's talked about it. So one of the big issues in Lacanian theory is what to do about the lack or decline of symbolic efficiency. Now, what that means, and we all know it already, there's like a decline in paternal authority. And that paternal authority doesn't work the way it used to. Now, there are certain people, like Deleuze-Guattarians, for example, are an example. There's a lot of different kinds of leftists who would just say paternal authority, evil, terrible, oppressive,
fascist,
good. I hope it declines. It's terrible.
Right.
But the psychoanalytic response is like, yes, there's all kinds of terrible shit that comes with paternal authority. But as bad as that shit is, to lose paternal authority altogether is even worse.
Right.
So that's what the from bad to worse means. And so, now, to be honest, I don't know where I stand in this debate, because I feel like everybody involved makes a lot of valid, good points. And so, so the point is, the decline of symbolic efficiency or paternal authority is not a pure liberation. Like, yes, there are good things that come with it, but there's maybe even worse things that come with it too. And so the point is, if social subjects are not primarily geared towards prohibition and, by extension, to a strong fidelity to their society's values and laws, right? What you get is a social subject that is organized around their own forms of enjoyment, opposed to the prohibitions they live by in order to be faithful to the cause of their society. And so the idea, where was I at?
You were just saying that the synthome is not any old symptom.
Okay.
And that's all you said.
I didn't cut out for long. Okay, so what I was saying is, the correct pronunciation of synthome is something like syntham. I'm not doing that. I have my reasons for it. I think it's important to be able to keep it straight. Like, there's symptoms and then there's the synthome. And synthome is how it looks. It's
Right.
spelled Sinthome. So
It's okay to anglicize. Yeah.
I'm calling it synthome. I'm calling Kierkegaard and not Kierkegaard.
Right.
And
We
so,
don't. We and it's croissant, not croissant.
right. Even though I won't say jouissance or
Oh fuck.
jouissance or something like that. Yeah, it's
That sounds like what Rick Roderick would say. Jouissance.
Right. But see here, look, I'm picking my preferences on pronunciation. This just proves the decline of symbolic efficiency. I'm not going to follow the laws of language itself. I will pick and choose the pronunciations I enjoy most.
Right.
Right. So,
Fair.
but that's kind of the point. Like, so the name of the Father as this prohibitory signifier, that's in decline, and so the point is that is what organized the registers for Lacan early on, is the name of the Father, the master signifier, right? And so the point is, for him, we go from some sort of social duty or mandate to whatever our preferred idiosyncratic form of enjoyment is. And that's what ends up organizing our registers or our positionality in the world. And so it's honest, it's what stabilizes our, I'm going to use the Heideggerian term. If the name of the Father used to be the traditional stabilizing mechanism of our being in the world, then now it's our idiosyncratic enjoyment that is our stabilizing mechanism. But here's the difference, right? If the name of the Father used to be that, then we all shared a kind of collective subjectivity together, right? Because it meant that we sacrifice our enjoyment, but we accept certain symbolic mandates or values that we collectively agree upon and accept as a kind of collective duty, right? But with the synthome, what you have is, it's almost like we're islands of enjoyment, right? Like all we are now is, the only way to stabilize our being in the world is to have a certain form of enjoyment that we repeat, that gets us through, right? And the point is, if the name of the Father gave us a kind of collective shared being in the world, we are common, we're common citizens of the nation or of the society. Synthome turns us into singularities. We're, in a sense, like, we don't share common values or anything. What really organizes us are just our weird particular forms of everyday enjoyment. And so all of this is inspired by the work of Jacques Lacan's son-in-law, which is Jacques-Alain Millier. Millier wrote a famous piece on ordinary psychosis. Now, I told you I don't want to do this clinical structures yet, but simply put, there's classical psychosis. There's psychosis as psychoanalysts traditionally understand it, which is to say it's either paranoia or schizophrenia. And then what Millier has in mind with ordinary psychosis. And I mean, he's getting at essentially like this whole thing with the synthome, and that, like, okay, we don't really live our lives based on social authority, prohibition. We kind of don't recognize it. The only real authority in our lives are the ways we enjoy. Now you'll hear in this like superego, right? The superego demands you to enjoy. Well, it's almost like we've shifted from the big other, or social, which is another name for social authority. If the law is split between the big other and the superego, then it's almost like a shift has occurred where we've gone from society being organized around our collective forms of sacrifice and our collective social mandates, our sense of national, and I don't mean in like a nationalistic sense, just our common citizenship, right?
Right.
Belonging to a common nation with common values and all of it. Like, that's not what centrally organizes us. We're little singularities of enjoyment, which makes us kind of like psychotics. Now, I need to read Millier's essay in much greater detail. I'm still torn on this whole thing of like, well, how psychotic are we? Because like everybody I interact with, I'm like, okay, we're still neurotics, but there's a sense in which I agree with this. And so this brings us back to Dwayne Roussel. Dwayne Roussel has taken this idea and really ran with it. And Dwayne has a new book coming out called Singularities, which is the singularities we're talking about.
Okay.
And so we can talk about ordinary psychosis, or we can talk about generalized foreclosure, which is to say, if the psychotic was a profoundly exceptional type of subject because they foreclosed or absolutely excluded the name of the father from entering in their psychic space, now it's like there's a generalized foreclosure of it, which is to say, none of us really give a shit about social authority. Like, we'll define what's right and what's wrong for ourselves, but again, we're not psychotics. I mean, I don't believe this can really be saying we're psychotics for real.
I'm glad you're bringing this up right now, because I felt like it would be easy for a person listening throughout the conversation to be like, don't look to anybody else like they're gonna fix the things, or like where like this traditional framework that we're talking about, and it is a traditional kind of framework.
Can anybody agree on anything anymore?
Right, like it seems less relatable now.
And that's what I think we're getting at. We're talking about this weird modification that traditional psychoanalysis didn't have conceptual mapping for, which is to say, there is no general consensus about what counts as authority. Like, this is the way it is, that's that. And we all, we disagree on certain things, but we all agree on this, right?
Right,
it all becomes singularities. Like, there is no consensus.
Right. Like our conversation at the beginning about etiquette. It's just like, if we don't have those conversations explicitly, then we are nothing, because there is no shared etiquette understanding, like when it comes to how to form connections online. Like any attempt to form connections online has to do some of these things consciously to a degree that no one ever really actually had to do before. And I am skeptical about the degree that you actually can do these things consciously without there also being in-person shit that is not always intelligible that necessarily occurs, just human shit. So
the point is, though, right? Like, if there's a decline in symbolic efficiency or social authority, that means there's a decline in the phallus, right? And this is the big point, right? Like, the lack of prohibition involves a lack of jouissance. That's the weird trick or irony or glitch in it. I mean, look, I think Deleuze-Guattarians think, prohibition's the problem. If you take all restrictions off of us, it'll be like libidinal paradise. No, it won't. Like, this is Marcuse in a lot of ways, right?
Right.
Like,
it's very hippie.
So the Lacanian or the Freudian Lacanian rebuttal would be, no, to have excess enjoyment, to have jouissance, you have to have a line of transgression. You have to have a limit imposed on you. Like, the no of the Father makes it possible for us to have jouissance via transgression or excess. And so we think, oh, look at this asshole taking our, with his arbitrary authority, taking our enjoyment from us. But what we don't get is, no, it's actually a way of giving us enjoyment. And not only that, if you don't have paternal authority or the phallic function, you will be a straight up psychotic without it. And that's worse than being a neurotic. And So
Well, you haven't. You keep saying you're not going to get into the structures, but you keep using them, which goes kind of against.
okay, but
You don't.
here's the thing: we don't have to get by neurotic. I just mean somebody who has accepted the law that I can't. I have to repress certain desires. I can't do whatever I want. Like I accept the repression of that comes with being a social subject.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that'll work.
And so, like, what the neurotic does, they repress the desire for the mother, right? Like, they have to repress that, and in repressing it, they exchange it with the no of the father. They exchange it with prohibition and law and all of that. The psychotic doesn't do that, and because of that, the psychotic is psychotic. So,
Right.
because the point is, they accept no prohibition on themselves, right? And it's easy, like in a hippie way, to like romanticize that. Well, yeah, go hang out with a fucking psychotic and see how much fun it is. See if you really want to spend your time with an actual psychotic. And look, I'm not saying all psychotics are like violent or any. A lot of them are, they're not. But the point is, I think the whole capitalism and schizophrenia, or like do away with paternal authority. I just think it's naive. Like that's the Lacanian thing against the, and me, I like Deleuze and Guattari in a lot of ways. I do.
Right.
I just think this whole thing about desiring production and schizo and out, like that's where they lose me. But that is what is this big topic right now in Lacanian circles, is this whole thing about generalized foreclosure, ordinary psychosis, singularities, synthome, and the Lacanian idea is like, look, we've gone from bad to worse. The more and more people just are isolated singularities, pursuing whatever idiosyncratic enjoyment they have that stabilizes their lives. Like, what kind of a society is that?
So this is.
Like, do we really want
Is the goal of this then to get, because these people are all leftists, so is the goal then to get them to reassess their feelings about authoritarianism, because maybe we do need a big daddy?
No, that's not it either. So, like, Žižek's been clear about this. The point is trying to think through, we don't want a return to that terribly oppressive traditional paternal authority, okay? We don't want that shit. We know what that does. But we also don't want a society, like don't we want some sort of like social solidarity, like consensus? We can get on the same page about shit. Like, that's kind of the deadlock we're in, is that, look, there is I'm fine with certain forms of contingent authority, right? That's okay. But there's an absolute risk in letting authority run amok. So yeah, that's why they're having the conference, is trying to think through this dilemma. And but the point is, like, that's the weird thing, right? Like, it's for the sake of enjoyment that we're kind of having to reassess the whole idea of prohibition. Like, when you are free to enjoy everything, you can't really enjoy anything. Is kind of like the psychoanalytic idea. And the law of enjoyment is more ideologically potent, since it is more subtle and cunning in how it hides power relations. And so that's the other problem, is that if you have politicians who adopt this position of, no, it's all about you and your enjoyment and everything, like, it seems like they're not oppressing you, but insisting for you to enjoy and sacrifice any kind of authority in its own way leads to a stronger, deeper, more unconscious form of authority, because you think you don't have authority, right? And so it's weird, like, when we're talking about philosophy, is always an attack on the master signifier, or what you and I would call our fundamental presupposition. We have to start going, wait, if the fundamental presupposition is that all authority is bad, then the philosopher's job is maybe to go, do we challenge that?
Right.
Because you think philosophy, the whole point is our job is to challenge contingent arbitrary authority. But when the doxa becomes the rejection, there's a role for it to play.
Yeah, what's been lost here? What's been thrown out or misunderstood, or because obviously if common sense has taken on a sort of anti-authoritarian posture, it's not doing so in a very philosophically rigorous way.
Right. And here's the thing, right? The other flip side of this, the phallus is what saves us as children, right? Like, if you just stay stuck in this attempt to sustain mother-child symbiosis for all eternity, I mean that's why Lacan likens the phallus to a rolling pin that gets stuck in the crocodile's mouth, that keeps the mouth open. So the image is like the mother, and let's be honest, mothers or primary caregivers can be real clingy. It's not like they want to maintain it too a lot of the time. And so Lacan's image is like, no, this third thing called the phallus opens up a space for the kid to get freed from the primary caregiver's lap, always being stuck on the primary caregiver. So this is where he sees a liberatory freeing function to the phallus as well. And so the point is, this shit is dialectical, it's multifaceted, it's complex, and just going, oh, paternal authority, phallus, bad, then when you think it through, that's the point of the Lacanian, we go from bad to worse.
Right. And so and I want to let you go. I know you gotta, but can you just give me a couple sentences that tie together, or give us a couple of sentences that tie together everything you've done so far as the phallus goes, this is about power and this is about ideology. Is part 2 the part on ideology, or did we already cover it?
No, we already did it. It's the one on ideology and power. So look, the point is, the phallus is a signifier, which is a very privileged one. It's the signifier that indicates power and social authority and prohibition. It also indicates that the person who has it has an exceptional status, that this person has access to enjoyment the way the rest of us don't. And because of that, people who are in the position of authority figures, right? They have a very seductive, powerful way of appealing to us, controlling us, mobilizing us, because of these unconscious dynamics surrounding the phallus, right? But at the same time, even though authority figures can have this power in politics and in ideology, what we also see at the same time is that there's a sharp decline in authority and phallic figures. And we can even say that the more that, generally speaking, paternal authority declines, whenever it does show up, it'll take on a more and more lethal, raw, monstrous form, because it's been repressed so much. It's like the return of the repressed. The more you repress it, the worse it's going to be when it comes back. And so this is what Lacanians are, a lot of them at least, are focused on at the moment, is thinking through the decline of paternal authority, this idea of all of us having a kind of ordinary psychosis, which is to say not taking authority very seriously, and us privileging our enjoyment as the main stabilizing mechanism of our lives, which has not been the case throughout most of human history. And so we live in strange times, and having the concept of the phallus to think through our times with, I think, is very helpful.
Woo. Well, thank you.
Yeah, sure thing.
I know that.
Let's do it.
Yeah. I guess I'll just say that your post gets a lot more in depth into a lot of these things, in that if anybody's listening to this and they're trying to think about gender identity and sexuation and things like that, we will get into it eventually, but in the next season. But one of the important things to point out is Michael does develop this somewhat in the post itself, and did so enough to, I guess, throw a wrench into how I was thinking about gender. In ways we'll get into probably in that episode, but it's a lot more. The thinking about the phallus and sexuation complicated things for me, because if it's not just how you feel and it's not just appearance, but also there's a way that people relate to you and a way that you relate unconsciously to others that can be a lot more profound than your biology, and a lot more profound than your positive senses of identification, then that complicates things. And so, like, one of the big problems for me was realizing, like, I have a masculine disposition in some ways that is not, like, I can play with it and I can play with ways of expressing it, but that doesn't change the fact that at the end of the day, like, my phantasmatic relation to that it factor is profoundly and inescapably a masculine, like an over, like it is in any fucking society, it is masculine. And that was just like, fuck. And not only that, but like, then I also just, something I say, I don't know if I've said this on stream, but like, my problems are mostly like guy problems. I have universal problems when it comes to time energy or whatever. You know, there are definite, you know, universal problems, but there's definitely problems that I deal with that I relate to guys a lot more, generally speaking. And so this is, it's made me have to think about that stuff a lot. And then just one last thing to maybe give people something to look forward to in that future conversation, but also something maybe to motivate people to go read your phallus post on the Dangerous Maybe blog, is the fact that understanding the phallus is more important, and we should have led with this. This would have kept people around a lot longer, I'm sure. Some of the people who clicked on and then clicked off, you know, shortly after. If we'd led with saying that understanding the phallus is more, if you are in the dating game and you're trying to understand flirtation and these kinds of dynamics that go with it and stuff like that, understanding the phallus is so much more important than anything you could learn from these fucking pickup artist people. And that you go into that a little bit, I think, in the post. I don't know how much of that's our conversations versus what's actually in the post.
Right, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of examples in the post, especially towards the end, that I didn't get to. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot there that we didn't talk about, but I just wanted to focus on the central aspects of the concept.
Yeah. Secret Asian Dan said, "What if I don't want to play a game, Daddy?" You don't have a choice. All right, well, everybody, thank you for joining. That concludes seasons 1 and 2, our series on Lacan and Žižek. Stay tuned for more someday, maybe. But this, I don't know what's going to be happening because I will not have a reliable... I mean, come on, I never have a reliable internet connection anyway. But, you know, I don't have a reliable place for my computer even right now because I'll be camping. Because the housing market is so bad right now that it's not really easy to get into a place, especially not short term.
Well, we will return when we can return.
Yeah, and I guess the last thing, Michael, say a thing about your channel and your laptop.
Oh, yes. So those of you who contributed to getting me a new laptop for me to be able to make videos on and stream on, I want to let you know that has been accomplished. I have it sitting right here, and all we got to do now is when Dave and I have some time, you got to show me how to operate the various software programs, but mission accomplished. And as far as the channel goes, or the blog goes, I have a blog on Medium called The Dangerous Maybe, where I spend a lot of time working through these concepts and trying to explain them to the best of my ability in a way that is accessible to people who have not spent 10 years reading the shit.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of stuff on Lacan, a lot of stuff on Žižek, there's stuff on DMG, there's stuff on Baudrillard, Bourdieu, some on Marx, some on Levinas. But I got a couple posts that I plan on getting up on the blog as soon as I can, but I am primarily focused on writing books right now.
Right.
And one will be out this fall, and then the main one I've been writing for years will be out when it's out. I make no promises on when that'll be.
Yeah, same. I'm kind of, well, my stuff's also just, there's stuff in the works. Stay tuned. But the torch is symbolically being passed in this conversation, because at the same time that I'm losing my computer set up here and this place and don't know when I'll be able to stream, you're just getting set up with your new computer, and you will be able to hopefully have conversations with other people. With who knows? Once you obviously have to focus on your book, but you had talked about doing some streams or whatever, and so the chances are next time there's a stream where you're hearing one of our voices, it could very well be Michael, and it could be on the Dangerous Maybe YouTube. So make sure to go subscribe to that, and yeah.
I think there's 2 videos on it, and they're Lacan videos, but they're from many years ago.
It's very
and
old.
They're pretty elementary. But
well, and the elementary thing, I do want to say something about that as well. It's just people will listen to these videos and then run around using the concepts, and I just wanted to say, like, this is an introduction. This is for people who want to get into this stuff and can't find their footing, and they can't find a Lacanian to just say it how it is. We are not professional academics. Both of us are warehouse workers in different parts of the country with different kinds of backgrounds. Mine a lot more rural. Michael's is a lot more urban. And different class positions and all of this. But we both, did not come alive for the life of the mind in our teen years, and we're hooligans in our own ways, and we both were dropouts. We both have our GEDs, but then when Michael got into philosophy, he's been doing it for like 17 years with this kind of standard that he has to be able to break things down simpler if he is to understand it, and be able to talk about a concept in 10 different ways without just constantly making references to other concepts or thinkers while doing so, which is not something it seems professional academics are usually very good at themselves. And so we're both in this kind of precarious situation where time and energy are scarce, and we're trying to sequester whatever little bit of time and energy we can when we're not working or exhausted to get ourselves situated with books and things like that, to where we'll be able to build something cool, and that it'll hopefully be something that is able to accelerate all of y'all's development in a way that Mikey didn't have access to when he was doing it, when he was starting out. And so he's been doing it for 17 years. I've been doing it for like 10, right? And it, I just kind of want to make the point. Michael makes it seem easy, but what I'm doing to him, asking him really simple questions, but then like going back to certain things, it's not something that like is easy. I mean, he clearly gets some jouissance from it, but a lot of academics will feel threatened or humiliated or like defensive if you actually try to get them to say what they're saying, to actually just spit it out, say it in a way that people can understand it. So anyway, I think that it's been a sort of miracle that we even met, that we've even been able to have a friendship before we did anything with this channel or with these conversations, and that you making it look easy. I really just want to drive home for people. It's not, though. This is like the hardest stuff in the world, and nobody's going to be able to give it to you straighter than Michael. This is why I've kind of put all my bets on Michael. This is why this year I've really made a point of emphasizing the need to hashtag free Mikey. This is why we got him the laptop. This is why we got him a Patreon. This is why we're publishing his books. This is why we're like, there's a lot here. And right now we're in this kind of sort of gray zone of just grinding, limbo, getting shit done. But there's a lot of exciting things to come. And the thing about it being easy, whenever I see people, they'll like, oh yeah, Michael's good. Oh yeah, his blog's great or whatever. But in reality, it's the key that unlocked the world of psychoanalysis for them, so that even if they disagree with it, they wouldn't even be able to disagree with it in good faith without having had that key handed to them by that blog. And he just, though you're just citing this person who gives you credit on his YouTube channel recently, the fact is you don't get a lot of credit, and I just think that it needs to be said. You're a fucking working class hero. You're a national treasure. You're people in other countries going to grad school, with all the time and energy, but like professors who can't really just tell them how it is. They're using your stuff. And for the people who just think it's easy, and then you hear it and you run around and you use it now, you don't have to do any more reading or anything like that. All I want to say is,
bitch, sit down.
Yeah, be humble.
Little bitch, be humble.
Yeah, I recorded that.
I was not expecting that.
I got my soundboard up just so I could do it.
Sit down. Be humble.
Yeah, sit down. Sit down. Everyone needs to be like saying free Mikey. If someone is, this is how you tell the good from the bad. If they've not been plugging your Patreon and saying free Mikey or referencing your blog, I don't fucking care. That's my position.
Well, all I can say to all that is, no, I mean, your friendship and your support means the world to me, and nobody has supported me more than you, and so I just, I thank you so much for all the help you've given to me over the years.
Cheers. All right, well, have a good night.
All right, you too. Take care, everybody.
Later, folks. Everyone go subscribe to Kivoy, and they're in the chat. Later.
Yeah, totally. Great stuff there. Yep.